Hey, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. We're going to have yet another great late night chat. So, yeah, let's do it. I am so glad to be here with all of you. Got to tell you here.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night chat. We'll be following our usual format tonight, which is first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions for the second half of the show. The best way to send your questions is to go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin and send your questions. And John McCarthy has already done that. So he'll have the first question. That was kind of a request, but he'll be the first question. There was also a question from Felix I didn't get to the other night, so he'll be on there. That'll be good. But yeah, we're doing great. Great things are happening. We just had a great, Saturday night. We had kind of a mega stream that went very, very well. And I had a very full day today. I'll tell you about that before we get going here tonight. But we're going to have yet another great late night chat. So in terms of announcements, the biggest announcement we've got is that the Center for Political Innovation, we are about to have our national 7-day training program in August. And we're raising money for that. And we got people signing up. A good crew of people are going to come to Chicago for 7 days of anti-imperialist education to solidify our organization, build. It's very exciting. Our national convention will be happening during that time. And we'll be having a France out of Africa rally to stand with the Union of Sahel States. That's going to be really, really great. That'll be happening the night before our convention's on the 15th. The France out of Africa rally is on the 14th, and the training program is the whole 7-day period from the 12th to the 19th. So yeah, if you'd like to join us at our national training program, please register. We do need you to register if you can come. And we got quite a few people registered already. And oh man, we're just doing great stuff. Had a good meeting with the CPI directors tonight that went very, very well. I got to say, good things were discussed. And yeah, we're moving right ahead. We are moving right ahead as an organization. So yeah, if you want to join us at our national 7-day training program in Chicago, please register, fill out the form down below, From a Drop to an Ocean, etc. Everything we do is about building the Center for Political Innovation, America's anti-imperialist movement that we are building right here in America at this time. And I am so excited about everything we got coming up. I cannot wait until the 7-day national training program and our convention. And we got great dedicated people in our group. I just got to tell you, the way some recent situations have been handled has really meant a lot to me. We have really got something special with CPI. Yep, that is the Center for Political Innovation. We are the organization that is doing it, and we got so many exciting things planned. We're going to have a little rally here in New York City later this week. I just ordered a big banner for it, and Oh man, we're headed out to Chicago, and man, so many great things are happening. So yes, if you are excited about anti-imperialism, join the Center for Political Innovation. If you want to help us with what we're doing, donate. Just go to the CPI website. There's a donate button. Send us a donation. That would be appreciated. A lot of very, very exciting things are happening with the Center for Political Innovation. So just to remind you of what I was saying before, we are following our usual format. First, I'll be giving my opening remarks tonight. Then from there, we'll be doing a roll call, and then I answer your questions for the remainder. For the second half of the show is all me answering your questions. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our show, all that I ask is that you go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin, send your question. You can also do super chats because we are monetized again. Super chats work as well. Or you can do Rumble rants if you're on the Rumble. You can cash at me. There are many different ways to give, but send questions. Give me something to talk about in the second half of our program. All good things, all great stuff happening. Great things are happening. I don't know if you saw, folks, but last week I was invited on a program, a very big podcast, and I opened. I didn't open. I followed Cornel West, which was a really big deal. First hour was Cornel West. Second hour was me. A lot of new possibilities are opening up for CPI as we get ready for our convention. We're building a movement here, but I want to tell you about my day today. And I just got to tell you, so I've been doing my media tour, right? I came out with this new book, Imperialism and Anti-Imperialism, and I've been doing every podcast I can get on. So this morning I woke up, and in the morning, I went on a podcast I've never been on before, Trad Catholic Night. And he's apparently a friend of Cynthia McKinney, and he is a traditionalist Catholic who lives in Ohio, and he's quite popular in the traditionalist Catholic circles. And we talked for a half hour, and I worried that, as a traditionalist Catholic, he might be a little bit hostile coming from, because I come from a communist background and stuff. Not at all. We talked. It was really, really great. We talked about Ukraine. We talked about anti-capitalism and kind of the overlap between the traditional Catholic anti-capitalist perspective and the innovationist perspective. We talked about Iran. We talked about Russia. It was really, really great. And we both love Dr. Cynthia McKinney. That should be up on his Substack as like a video within the next few days. Half-hour chat with Trad Catholic Night. It was great. Cynthia McKinney said, you really ought to go on this podcast. I did. It was great. Then this afternoon, I started the afternoon, 12 o'clock, 12:15, I went on WBAI radio to talk about the Memorandum of Understanding between the USA and Iran and where it currently stands. And I guess it was a short interview. And while we're waiting for people to come on in, and then I'll get to the main crux, why don't we put that on, right? This was my WBAI interview I did this afternoon with an update on where the Memorandum of Understanding between the USA and Iran is currently. That's what we talked about. It was a good show. I'm glad I did it. I don't know where the video is. Let me pull up the video, and we'll put my WBAI interview from this afternoon on. And then I reported on the UN Security Council meeting that I was on RT to describe the UN Security Council meeting, and I'll put that on as well. So that's while we're waiting for people to come on and pile in, and then after that we'll get to the show for tonight. I don't think that's the right. Okay, maybe we'll put on the WBAI interview you later because I don't think, this is odd. I don't think it's the right one that I uploaded, but maybe it is. Maybe I just put something wrong. I don't know. Here, let me pull it up. Let me make sure I have the right interview here because the date on the file is wrong. WBAI. Okay. Yeah, I uploaded the wrong file. That's what it was. All right. Okay. So yeah, this is the correct, this is my WBAI interview from today that I did. Here we go.
On the show now, we're joined by Caleb Maupin, journalist, author and founder of the Center for Political Innovation, on the latest out of Iran and the latest with the Memorandum of Understanding in Lebanon. Welcome to the show, Caleb.
Sure, glad to be here as always.
So the conflict between the United States and Iran intensified at the end of last week, despite the Memorandum of Understanding intended to end the hostilities. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched strikes against 8 U.S. military installations in Kuwait and Bahrain in retaliation for U.S. attacks on Iranians' targets. The latest escalation began after a drone strike on an oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, followed by U.S. airstrikes on Iranian coastal sites. Washington accused Tehran of violating the MOU, while Iran argued it'd been acting within the agreement, insisting that it alone had responsibility for managing and reopening the Strait of Hormuz and objecting to international efforts to move shipping through the waterway without its approval. So where are we? Where do things stand as of this morning?
So the latest news is that Iran considers the MOU to still be in effect. And as far as they are concerned, this is within the parameters of the MOU that the Strait of Hormuz will be opened within 30 days. And it will take 30 days for the mines to be cleared out, for the militarization of the strait to be cleared. And until then, they have the right to prevent any ship from going through it if they choose. And that they say that the ships that they have attacked have not only not gone through it, but they've taken unauthorized routes. And that as far as they are concerned, that according to the MOU, within the next 30 days, they run the strait, and ships that want to go through it have to talk to them first and go through it the way they say they can go through it with their military escort. That is the Iranian position. Now, Donald Trump tweeted out this morning that talks between the United States and Iran are set to take place tomorrow, Tuesday, in Doha. However, Iran has not confirmed that, so it's not clear. It's rather bizarre of a situation, but we had a fiery weekend with the USA bombing Iran, with Iran retaliating against U.S. ships, and yet the understanding seems to be that the MOU remains intact. That is the understanding as we head into this week. Happy Monday.
So the recent attacks represent the first military confrontation since the U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding was signed. Does this expose a fundamental weakness in the agreement, or was this crisis always anticipated as a test of its durability?
Well, I'm listening very carefully to the language that the White House is using. J.D. Vance came out and said violence will be met with violence, and he's been echoed. The White House press secretary has used similar language, like if you think Trump is going to sit back and let Iran engage in violence and attack, and they're using this kind of like Old Testament eye for an eye language, which is insulting to the world, right? If we're going to play that game, an eye for an eye. So does that mean Iran gets to blow up an elementary school in America? Does that mean that Iran gets to, kill our head of state? Of course not. That's absurd. It's insulting that they're even bothering to use that. But it seems like Trump is trying to reassure the military to some degree or other, right? And he's using language about U.S. military might, and our ships are so big and our guns are so big. And it almost seems like there may be opposition to the Memorandum of Understanding from the military, and that Trump is trying to please people within the military by using this kind of language. I'm shocked that Iran still considers the MOU to be in effect, and I'm also shocked that Trump is announcing that there's going to be negotiations. Now, these negotiations are not confirmed, and in the past, Trump has announced negotiations that Iran has said, no, we never agreed to that. So we'll see if these talks in Doha end up actually happening. But the language is certainly bizarre. As far as Iran is concerned, their understanding of the MOU is that they control the Strait of Hormuz for the next 30 days. So if people want to go in and out of it, they have to do it with their military escort, and they have to take the route that they tell them. And now there have been ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. It's not completely closed. It's under Iranian control. And they say these ships that were attacked didn't follow Iran's instructions. They were going on an unauthorized route that Iran gave them warnings and said, if you go on this unauthorized route, we're going to have to take military action. And that they were hit with one-way drones. So these are drones that basically they fly at a ship and explode, right? They're not like drones that strike the ship and then fly back to the drone facility. They're one-way drones that hit the ship, and I guess the USA deflected 3 of them. What's very interesting is that both of these ships that were attacked, one of them was a ship that was wearing the flag of Singapore. The other ship was wearing the flag of Panama, but Iran somehow detected that these were both American commercial vessels. And that's interesting. And I guess that's a common tactic at sea, right, to avoid attacks. You put up a false flag, a literal false flag, like the flag of another country. But Iran seems to know which are the U.S. commercial vessels and which are not, and that seems to be what happened. So we'll see how this develops.
Right. Iran says its objective remains a complete Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon, while Israel insists the new framework allows it to maintain a military presence. Are these positions fundamentally irreconcilable, making this agreement unworkable from the outset?
Well, that remains in question. I mean, how can you have a memorandum of understanding between the United States and Iran that includes an end to fighting in Lebanon, and the Israeli government and the Lebanese government and Hezbollah not all agreeing to that? But that was the terms of the memorandum of understanding. And I mean, there has been some kind of agreement between the Lebanese government and Israel, but Hezbollah has denounced that agreement and said they won't adhere to it. And so it's not clear. And with Lebanon being a sticking point in the memorandum of understanding, you have to ask what's going on. I am shocked that Iran is saying it's still intact. But that's good, I guess, right? I mean, there's the hope that we won't be seeing a huge amount of killing. We won't see a huge escalation. The strikes the USA took against Iran, they say they struck drone facilities. They say they struck communication infrastructure. These strikes on Iran seem like they were pretty massive, but yet the Iranian side isn't really confirming that. So it's not clear what's actually happening. We'll see if there's talks on Tuesday.
The U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding reportedly envisioned a complete ceasefire that included Lebanon, yet Secretary of State Marco Rubio has described Lebanon as a separate issue. And then we've seen that there was this agreement between the Lebanese government and Israel. But as you say, Hezbollah and Amal, two of Lebanon's most influential Shia political forces, rejected the agreement, saying it violates Lebanon's sovereignty. So can any security agreement succeed if key domestic actors refuse to recognize it?
Well, that's important, and that raises a bigger question that's coming up in other spheres, which is, who does Marco Rubio really work for? Because at this point, Marco Rubio is coming out and saying that there has never been any agreement between the USA and Russia regarding Ukraine. However, we had the Russian Foreign Ministry over the weekend come forward and say that in Anchorage, the Americans put forward a scenario for ending the war in Ukraine, and Russia agreed. And that last year, 1 year ago, August 15th, almost a year ago, when the meeting took place between Trump and the Russian President Putin in Anchorage, Alaska, the Americans had a very sensible proposal for ending the war, and Russia agreed to it. And now Marco Rubio is coming forward and saying that's not true, that never happened. And so there's a very big difference of opinion. And often if you listen to the way Marco Rubio talks, not just about Iran, but about a number of issues, the way he talks and the way the rest of the administration talks don't line up. And that raises the question of who is Marco Rubio working for. And, Marco Rubio is a Miami Cuban. He comes out of the kind of anti-Castro fanatical conservative networks based in Florida. And it appears that, on the one hand, some of his remarks are just kind of podium pounding. He talks against communism and he talks about spreading freedom and et cetera. And then other times it's like he's following his own script. He's not following the rest of the administration. I will say also that, there's a little bit of divergence when it comes to J.D. Vance as well. And what that's about is that J.D. Vance would like to be president. And I think that is the kind of consensus among the administration, is that J.D. Vance will be the next president of the United States. And this war is wildly unpopular. So J.D. Vance needs to get credit for ending it, right? Because if J.D. Vance runs as the part of the administration that has presided over this disastrous war and the disastrous inflation that's resulted from it, he'll lose. So J.D. Vance also talks differently about the war and is positioning himself as if, he's trying to wrap this all up, maybe hinting he was against it from the beginning, which I'm not sure is even necessarily true. So there are different agendas. You have to wonder to what degree or other right? Things are presented as Israel won't comply, the USA wants them to, Marco Rubio talks one way, J.D. Vance talks another way, but you have to wonder how much of this is planned, how much of this is kind of behind the scenes, okay, you're going to play this role and you're going to sound like the nice guy, good cop, bad cop routine, or to what degree or other there are just real differences within the administration and between the USA and Israel. I don't know, and we really don't know. And are they playing us for fools and performing kind of a song and dance for us, or do they really legitimately have different agendas and disagreements? And I think there's probably a little bit of both going on.
There's looks like a potential sort of dispute might arise with California Representative Ro Khanna arguing that President Trump's strike on Iran violated a war powers resolution passed by both chambers of Congress. Is this setting up a constitutional confrontation over who has the ultimate authority to take the United States to war, the president or Congress?
It is, and there are bigger issues, I would say, within the Democratic Party. Ro Khanna, his position has been that he is anti-war and that he will work with conservatives and Republicans to stop wars. He's been saying very loudly that we need a joint populist anti-war movement. He's been talking very positively about Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson, and he's a Democrat, but he's not following kind of the partisan script. And we see the Democratic Party being pulled in several different directions right now. On the one hand, the Democratic Party has always been the party of urban political machines. Tammany Hall here in New York, the Rizzo machine in Philadelphia, the Chicago Daily machine, the Pelosi's, they are a product of the San Francisco machine if there ever was such a thing. And they, that's the Democratic Party on the one hand. On the other hand, you have the kind of wealthy New England old money that funds a lot of liberalism and think tanks, right? You have the Rockefellers, and you have the Asia Society, and you have the Council on Foreign Relations, and that there's kind of a clash going on between the Democratic Party's urban political machine base and a lot of the functionaries, and on the other hand, kind of the kind of slick liberal politics that's been thought up by academics and think tanks that is, trying to stabilize the economy. And these things don't always line up. And that in the last election, the way Trump was able to win was that RFK, he was able to announce he was running for president as a Democrat at first, and then later potentially as a third party, and then he eventually joined the Trump camp. And that was Trump kind of recruiting the urban political machines. RFK was, critical of vaccines, and he wanted peace with Russia, and he's Roman Catholic, and he's from the Kennedy family, and, a little bit more socially conservative than most Democrats are. And he kind of represented the urban political machine, saying, we're not on board with where the Democratic Party has gone and where the Biden administration has gone. We're going to do our own thing. And then Trump made some deals with them, absorbed them. What's interesting is that Trump has now purged that faction. Tulsi Gabbard is out. RFK's daughter-in-law, who was working with Tulsi Gabbard, resigned. And that layer has just kind of been pushed out. There's also a layer in the Republican Party that Trump has repudiated, the Marjorie Taylor Greene folks, the Tucker Carlson folks. Tucker Carlson is considering an independent presidential run in the upcoming election. And so there's kind of a renegotiation going on. Ro Khanna is not in line with the rest of his party, but I would say he's not in line with the DSA, the kind of the far left sweep that we're seeing in New York City politics either. He represents kind of a different strata. The mainstream of the Democratic Party is in big crisis. The incident that happened over the weekend, we saw a very prominent figure, in the Democratic Party of San Francisco go to a transgender rally and be chased out by transgender activists chanting "Free Palestine," calling him out for his support for Israel. That's a very, very big deal. And this is a Democrat, somebody who's slated to be Nancy Pelosi's successor, who is on record as just one of the most pro-LGBT and pro-transgender activists in America, right? I mean, he's just considered to be just kind of the representative of the LGBT movement, but he's pro-Israel. And so when he went to this rally expecting to be lauded as a great activist for the transgender community, he was met with boos and heckling and, Free Palestine, and essentially chased out of the rally. That's a big moment. And we have the Democratic Party is very confused about which way to go. And we'll see. I mean, I think it's very likely J.D. Vance will become the next president. The only way that that's going to not happen is if the Democratic Party is willing to nominate somebody who is going to offend a very large chunk of their party. And the Democrats don't seem willing to do that. They seem to kind of settle on kind of consensus, mediocre candidates like Kamala Harris that no one's excited about.
Right, and the congressman you're talking about is California State Senator Scott Wiener, who was verbally harassed and intimidated in the San Francisco Trans March at the weekend. Caleb Maupin, we've run out of time. We always do. Grateful for your insights and thoughts. Thank you for being on the show this afternoon.
Sure thing. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. That was Caleb Maupin, journalist and author and founder of the Center for Political Innovation, on the latest on the Iran Memorandum of Understanding, where we are after the strikes over the weekend, and a little bit on Lebanon and a little domestic policy.
Yeah. So I was on WBAI this afternoon. That's thousands of listeners, right? And then I did my job on RT, where I have millions of viewers. And I reported on the UN Security Council meeting at 3 p.m. They had a UN Security Council meeting to talk about Ukraine's latest atrocities, blowing up a bus full of, athletes, soccer players.
Replenish the ranks of the Ukrainian armed forces will forcibly mobilize individuals is steadily declining.
Let's get the details from our New York correspondent, Caleb Maupin, now. Caleb, thanks for joining us. So take us through everything that's emerged from that meeting of the UN.
Sure. When addressing the 15-member body that leads the United Nations, Deputy Ambassador Anna Yevstokhneva described a terrorist attack from Ukrainian forces, drones that struck a bus with 44 passengers on it, including 28 young athletes. Now, they gave the information from the Russian Investigative Committee, and the word terrorism is the most accurate description of what went on. This was deliberate targeting of civilians. Here's what we heard from the Russian deputy envoy.
The Western patrons of the Kiev regime are perfectly aware that their weapons are not being used to defend democracy, but rather to strike at civilians and civilian infrastructure. However, this inconvenient truth does not bother them in the slightest. In this very hall, representatives of Western countries consistently broadcast the necessity of a ceasefire. They portray themselves as paragons of peacefulness. All these multi-billion-pound injections into the hostilities in Ukraine definitively expose Europe's true face. It acts not as a mediator, but as a main sponsor of the continuation of the war, attempting to speak to Russia in the language of ultimatums, threats, and political blackmail. By stubbornly and irresponsibly continuing to pump Kiev with armaments, you have long since become accomplices in its numerous crimes. You bear direct political and moral responsibility for them. Russia does not accept ultimatums, it does not bargain under pressure, and will not allow solutions that contradict the fundamental interests of its national security to be imposed upon it.
Now, this is not the first meeting of the UN Security Council that Russia has called as a permanent member to describe the atrocities and acts of terrorism committed by Ukrainian forces. This time, as the deputy envoy addressed the 15-member body, she emphasized that it was time for unambiguous condemnation. Western leaders have given vague statements, but they have refused to just come forward and call out Ukraine for violating the international law and engaging in terrorism, targeting civilians. She called for unambiguous condemnation of what should be obvious to the world.
It is disappointing that the UN Secretariat lacks the courage and principles to call things by their proper names, to declare the Kiev regime as the obvious perpetrator of the tragedy in Bryansk region and other heinous crimes. Instead, we once again hear the same toothless comments from international officials about the unacceptability of attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. Behind these general statements lies political cowardice and an unwillingness to acknowledge Zelensky's crimes, even when children become the victims. At the same time, any unsubstantiated accusations against our country are immediately seized upon by the UN Secretariat without the necessary verification. We demand unambiguous condemnation of these bloody crimes from the Secretary General and relevant UN structures.
Now, recently, Zelensky has leveled threats against Belarus, talking about preemptive strikes in response to an alleged plan to attack Ukraine from Belarus. Now, the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has made clear that it's not possible. Kiev really does not have the manpower to carry out an incursion into Belarus. And we heard echoing of those statements from the Belarusian envoy speaking before the meeting as part of the UN rules allowing countries that are part of the discussion to take part in Security Council meetings. Here's what the envoy of Belarus had to say speaking before the UN Security Council.
It can already be stated with complete certainty that the attack on the bus was not the result of accidental or indiscriminate actions that caused collateral damage. This attack was deliberate and targeted. Ukraine immediately denied any involvement in the attack on the bus. Today we have evidence that allows us to state with certainty that the attack on the Belarusian bus was carried out by a Ukrainian-made strike drone. Such actions are deliberate, aimed at escalating the conflict and dragging Belarus into the armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine. This is an attempt to create a pretext for pitting accusations leveled at Belarus of complicity in the conflict sound particularly cynical when made by states that are spending billions of dollars on supplying Ukraine with weapons, training its military personnel, and sharing intelligence. It is precisely these countries that are not merely complicit, but direct participants in the war, and are doing everything in their power to ensure that this war continues.
Now, Kiev has intensified its campaign of drone strikes targeting Russia, calling it, quote, long-term sanctions, long-range sanctions that they are engaging in, saying that they're targeting economic infrastructure. And if one looks at the details of what Kiev is currently doing, this is deliberate targeting of civilians, and that was made clear when the Russian deputy representative addressed the Security Council. Deliberate targeting of civilians intended to cause the population to be terrorized and weary. These are crimes and violations of the UN Charter, completely unacceptable. But yet, when Western countries addressed the Council, they offered only vague statements condemning Russia, blaming Russia for the entire situation, not acknowledging the horrendous atrocities that Russia has documented being carried out by Ukrainian forces.
Caleb, many thanks for updating us. That's our correspondent speaking to us from New York. Caleb Maupin, thank you.
Yep. So that was my day. First the Trad Catholic interview, then WBAI. Then I went into town and did the RT interview, the RT reporting from the UN Security Council. And then I came home and we had a CPI leadership meeting with my regional captains, great crew of people. Shout out to all of you. Very good folks. We got on the same page. And amid all of that, I did have the opportunity to do a slideshow for you all. But the slideshow is themed around this very, very important photograph. This is probably one of my favorite photographs. This is a photograph that is really, really, really important. And I've shown it on these streams before, and I've used it on the cover of books and all of that. This photograph is really, really important because there you see a group of veterans in their uniforms, black and white together, and they're marching through the streets of Philadelphia. And they have a sign that says, "We won't fight another rich man's war." And in a few days, it will be the 50th anniversary of this photograph. And I've told you all about where it came from on these streams before, but I'm going to go into great depth tonight about where this photograph was taken, why those veterans were marching through the streets of Philadelphia on July 4th, 1976, in their military uniforms with a sign that said, "We won't fight another rich man's war." Tonight, we're going to have a slideshow about this historic photograph and where it came from. So enjoy. 50 years ago, 2 July 4th rallies in Philadelphia. History does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Now, those are the words of Mark Twain, and they point to a certain reality that when people say history repeats itself, it never exactly repeats itself. No two moments in history are exactly the same. There are always different factors, but often things do go in a similar way. There are patterns that we can notice in history, but there is constant change as well. And that's why you have to be careful with stuff like this. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the July 4th, 1976 Bicentennial rallies in Philadelphia and the different communist groups that were involved and all of that. You have to be very, very careful with these kinds of historical analogies. The internet is full of bad historical analogies, especially when it comes to communist politics. Two great examples I saw. A YouTube streamer named Bad Mouse did a video attacking the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists, Joe T. Brar, our friends over in Britain. And in the video, they said one of the most extremely incorrect statements ever. They compared Bob Avakian, the leader of the RCP, to the Black Panthers. And they said, everybody loved the Black Panthers, but everyone thought Bob Avakian, who just talked about class, was boring. Nothing could be... First of all, when the Black Panthers were in their ascendancy, the RCP didn't exist. Bob Avakian's group wasn't formed until 1975. And when they were formed as the Revolutionary Union, they were formed as a group of white people that were in alliance with the Black Panthers. And also, if you look at the RCP right now, they don't just talk about class all the time. In fact, the RCP, their approach, they don't even talk about economics at all. And I watched it, and I thought that was just one of the most ignorant things. And then there was another document going around the internet, also attacking our friends in the CPG-BML. And it was by, I think it was by one of these, fools who used to be in the CPG-BML who talks trash against CPI. And he was comparing the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists, to the Workers' Party of Belgium. And he was saying, oh, the Workers' Party of Belgium is really, really big and has all these seats in parliament. And the CPG-BML doesn't. Well, the Workers' Party of Belgium has been a huge political party for decades, going back to the 1970s. It is the main leftist group in Belgium. It was started by Ludo Martens. I mean, it's a huge political party in Belgium. And Belgium is not Britain, right? Britain is, the homeland of the British Empire. Belgium is geographically close to Eastern Europe. Like, you can't compare the two groups. And so there's a lot of bad comparisons that go on. Oh, one group here did something and had success, and one group here did something and didn't have success, and that proves, and often it doesn't. Okay, so you got to be really, really careful. And tonight, you have to remember, I'm pointing to some things that are true about what went on in 1976, but I'm not saying that it's the same as nowadays, because it ain't. There are some very, 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 very big differences between the time period 50 years ago and the time period today. Again, there are some echoes and there are some lessons I think we can draw from this, but we want to be careful with this, right? In July 4th, 1976, there were two rallies held in Philadelphia. It was the 200-year anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And in Philadelphia, that's where they signed the Declaration of Independence. And there were two rallies led by communists to oppose the Bicentennial. President Gerald Ford was there. They had a big patriotic parade on one side of town, and on two other locations, there were communist protests that were anti-imperialist, that were opposed to the U.S. colonization of Puerto Rico, opposed to U.S. wars, etc., that happened to counter the Bicentennial. So what are the major differences between now and then? Well, the first major difference is that in 1976, the USA had a huge industrial working class. There were factories all over America. Any major city you went to, there would be factories that were cutting sheets of metal, stamping metal. There were steel mills, there were auto plants, there were meat packing facilities, and those factories are no longer there. And part of it is offshoring, but some of it is mainly, it's just been technology, that human beings have been replaced by machines. That's the issue that I talk about on these streams a lot, the problem of overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, and the main jobs killer in industry has been automation, not offshoring. Offshoring is a factor, right? When they close the factory here down and take it to Mexico. But the main thing is not taking the job down to Mexico. It's just that, human labor is replaced by machines. It used to be steel mills employed thousands and thousands of people. Now, a lot of steel mills have less than 100 workers, right? So automation got rid of that. But at the time in 1976, there was a huge industrial working class in America. Lots and lots of people who worked in a factory. And as a result, the labor unions were strong. All the steel mills, those workers were members of United Steel Workers Union. All the auto plants, those workers were members of the United Auto Workers Union, the UAW. And when you had industries, you had industrial unions. And on top of that, the economy was just better. You know, the average wage that people made was a lot more in terms of paying their bills, right? And that's where you talk about, you know, the prosperous suburbs, the house with the white picket fence and all of that. Things were starting to decline in the mid 70s, but they hadn't gotten to where they are now by any means. There was still a very, very prosperous industrial middle class in America. A lot of labor union workers who lived very comfortably and made very good wages at those jobs, right? They were making a lot more than what our generation is making in the gig economy and the service sector. That's the first thing you have to keep in mind. Second is that globally, there was an anti-imperialist movement at that point. It was massive. The Vietnamese had just won the Vietnam War. China had a communist government. The Soviet Union was still in existence. The Eastern Bloc was still in existence. But the global anti-imperialist movement was overwhelmingly dominated by Marxist-Leninist forces during this time, which is not the case anymore. China, their history is Marxism-Leninism, but it's Marxism-Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory. You know, they have socialism with Chinese characteristics. Cuba is a Marxist-Leninist government. Vietnam, North Korea, but even North Korea, it's the Juche, which they say is a different, you know, stage, a higher stage beyond Marxism-Leninism. And nowadays, the primary ideology among forces that are resisting imperialism is not Marxism-Leninism. You know, in Iran, you have the Shia Muslim axis of resistance, you have Bolivarianism. But back then, Marxism-Leninism was the primary ideology. China and the Soviet Union had cut ties, but both of them claimed the heritage of Marx and Lenin. Both of them had revolutions based on, you know, the movement that was led by Joseph Stalin. You know, so that's another thing to keep in mind. The third is that at the time, there was a huge anti-imperialist movement around the world dominated by communist forces, but the USA was courting China as an ally against the Soviet Union. China broke relations with the USSR in 1961. You had the Sino-Soviet split. And by 1969, China was often on the same side as the United States around the world. And, you know, the first major break in Chinese-Soviet foreign policy was the intervention in Czechoslovakia. The Soviet Union intervened in Czechoslovakia in 1968. The Soviet Union sent troops in to remove Dubček, who was kind of a CIA-aligned leader who they brought into power with the Prague Spring, which was kind of like the first color revolution. They brought in this kind of, you know, democratic socialist, anti-Soviet leader. The Soviet Union moved in to remove him. And China condemned it as Soviet social imperialism. And then in Angola, right, the African people were fighting against colonialism, fighting against Portugal. And the main group resisting the Portuguese was the MPLA, the Liberation Movement of Angola. And China backed another group called UNITA, the Union for the Total Liberation of Angola. And they sent military advisors and trainers. And the CIA also backed UNITA. And UNITA was like a counter gang, but China was saying that the Soviet Union was the main threat. And then later, you know, China had friendly relations with Pinochet in Chile in 1973 after the coup, and that increasingly China was aligning with the United States, arguing that the Soviet Union was the main danger to the people of the world. They have what they called the theory of three worlds, etc. And that was another thing. And the USA was actively trying to recruit China as a communist Marxist-Leninist country to be on America's side against the Soviet Union. It was Henry Kissinger who was the main strategist behind that. Henry Kissinger had the idea of, you know, manipulating China and the Soviet Union against each other and offering U.S. investment to China as kind of a way to get China on the American side. So you had that going on. And then the fourth factor, which is very different from today, is that there was a movement feeling among African Americans as a result of the civil rights movement. The Black community had defeated legal segregation. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had passed the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and there was an optimism among Black people in America. They felt they could fight the system and win. And among the Black working class, there was a sentiment that organizing, protesting, getting involved in the movement was something that one could do. And the Black Panthers were still a household name at this point. They didn't have as much influence as they had maybe 6 or 7 years prior, but in 1976, they were still a household name. And almost every major city, the Black Panthers had a significant following and a base among the population. In Detroit, 1973, you had Wildcat Summer, where you had wildcat strikes in Detroit, led by black workers in the auto plants, and that this was a totally different atmosphere than today. So any lesson that we draw from this, we have to remember the context, right? That the economy was much better, and you had a strong industrial working class in factories. Marxism, Leninism dominated anti-imperialist forces. The USA was trying to align itself with China and court China as an ally against the Soviets. And there was a big movement among the black community. There was a feeling that protesting and organizing was a good thing to do, and it could win victories. There was a very positive feeling toward political activism among black Americans during the 1970s. So what happened? January of 1976, a group called the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee, which was the legal wing of the Weather Underground terrorists, called the Hard Times Conference in Chicago. And in Chicago, they called a national communist conference in January, and they got about 3,000 people to come to the conference. And it was utter chaos. All these communist groups fought with each other, and there were fist fights, and it was utter chaos. But they got 3,000 people there, and they had the money. And the dirty little secret about the Weather Underground terrorists is their parents were all millionaires. Bill Ayers, who later went on to be a big supporter of Barack Obama, and a college professor after he turned himself in. He was the leader of the terrorist group that was bombing things. And his family, they own the state monopoly on electricity in Chicago. His family are millionaires many times over. And Bernadine Dorn, right? That's his wife, right? Her family were millionaires many times over. And Jeff Jones and Mark Rudd. And these are super, super wealthy kids that start this underground terrorist bombing group. They were leaders of Students for a Democratic Society. And then they took like 30 of their friends and they went underground and they started blowing things up. And they were terrorists, and they bombed the U.S. Capitol building, and they bombed the Pentagon. And, they were rich kids. And after a while, they weren't getting attention for doing it. At first, when they would do it, it got a lot of media attention. And then the government figured out that that's the last thing you want to do when, someone blows something up to get, support, to get publicity. Don't give them attention. Now, to their credit, I guess, they always called in the threats. They never actually killed anybody. They destroyed property. They would evacuate the building first. They blew up buildings, the Weather Underground. And after a few years, they realized that nobody was listening to them anymore. It didn't even make the news when they would blow something up. It didn't get any attention. So they started this group called the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee. They distributed a book. They printed a manifesto, and they distributed in bulk around the country. And then they formed like reading groups to read their manifesto. Their book was called Prairie Fire. It comes from Mao Zedong. A single spark can start a prairie fire. And so they had this book called the Prairie Fire Manifesto, and they distributed it around the country. And then they started like little reading groups to read the Prairie Fire Manifesto. And that became the legal above ground wing of the Weather Underground that was funded by the millionaire families that ran the Weather Underground. It's called the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee. And they had millions of dollars to fund their activities because the leaders of the terrorist group that they were aligned with had millions of dollars. And so they sponsored a conference. They called, hey, we're just going to have this big conference in Chicago. And January 1976, must have been cold, right? Chicago's pretty cold in January. They had this big conference, and all the big communist groups showed up. Now, one of the communist groups that was there was called the October League. And we'll talk about the October League, right? So I'll pull up, I got some pictures, right? The October League is a very, very interesting case study, right? The October League was led by this guy, Mike Klonsky. Mike Klonsky's dad was a leader of the Communist Party, and Mike Klonsky his son was a boomer, and Mike Klonsky started a new communist party that was aligned with China. It was originally called the October League, later became the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist, the CPML. And they went to China. They got China's official backing. And they behaved in a very sketch way, right? For example, you can go read their old newspapers. Their old newspapers are available. You go to the Marxist Internet Archive. Their newspapers have two types of articles in them. One type of article is an article about a protest happened somewhere. And the second type of article is a cryptic article written in like hyper Marxist language, repeating whatever the latest talking points of Beijing are, whatever the latest line from the communist leadership of Beijing are. right? They supported the Gang of Four. They supported the Three Worlds theory. When Mao died, they eventually embraced Deng Xiaoping. And eventually the October League dissolved. China basically just told them, we don't want you anymore. We really don't need allies in the United States. We don't need an allied political party. But it was led by Mike Klonsky. Yeah, that's him toasting with Hao Guofeng, who was Mao's first successor before the rise of Deng Xiaoping. And Mike Klonsky led it. And they did a lot of stuff that was like, it almost didn't really matter to American politics. For example, in China, when they had protests against Confucius, the October League had protests of their own against Confucius, right? And they protested. They went to the college campuses and they took Confucius books from the library and burned them. Mao Zedong says this is a bunch of shit. And they did a lot of stuff that was very, very blatantly pandering to the Chinese line. And they were the October League. Now, there's a documentary on YouTube you can watch about Deng Xiaoping seizing power and arresting the Gang of Four. And one of the people who's interviewed in it is an American photographer who was in Beijing at the time. And he admits he just wanted to go to China to take pictures, and you couldn't get a visa to get into China. Travel to China was very restricted during this years. So what did he do? He pretended he joined the October League. He pretended to be a communist in order to get into China to take pictures. Well, that sounds like CIA shit, right? And the October League especially, it was very much, they were a group that was the group that echoed the Chinese line the loudest, and, you know, and arranged U.S. travel to China. And, you know, something was going on there, right? That was the October League. And Mike Klonsky was a big guy at this Hard Times conference. He was there. And then you had the Socialist Workers Party, the SWP, the Trotskyite group that was about 5,000 people that was, you know, said they supported Cuba, but condemned the Soviet Union. Another thing is the gay rights movement was very new at this time, but it was getting a huge amount of media publicity. And they decided this conference, you know, that they were going to include the gay rights movement. And they made a really, really big point of featuring gay speakers and all of that. And some of these communist groups were not pro-LGBT, but for some reason, the Weather Underground, they were pro-LGBT, and they decided gay rights was going to be a big part of it. And then this was also the heyday of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. It was originally called the Young Lords. It was like modeled on the Black Panthers among Puerto Rican Americans. And the Black Panthers, their influence had kind of peaked in the early 70s. But the Young Lords, they were, you know, kind of modeled on the Panthers, and they kind of were rising in influence during these years among Puerto Rican Americans. So the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, they all gathered for this conference, you know, the Hard Times conference in January. And they couldn't agree on much, and there were fistfights, and there was chaos, but they ultimately agreed, we're going to have a protest against the 200-year anniversary of America in Philadelphia, and we're going to call it Bicentennial Without Colonies. That's what they were going to call it. And just to show you, this is an example, the October League, who I mentioned, right? They took the line, they just kind of followed Beijing's line. This is a book they published, right, about Angola. Two superpowers, the main enemy of the people of the world. It was all about how the Soviet imperialists and the U.S. imperialists are fighting over Angola, right? And they're against both of them, right? And at the time, China was aligned with this UNITA, right? You know, and it's an interview with Mike Klonsky about you shouldn't support the Soviet-aligned communists of Angola, but you also shouldn't support the U.S. imperialists. You should support the Third Way, right? Published by the October League. That's kind of an example of what was going on, right? So communism in America during these years, it was in an interesting state. So in the 1950s, McCarthyism had fractured the Communist Party USA. They had been forced into illegality. Basically, if you were a member of the Communist Party, you were arrested, or maybe maybe the FBI followed you to your job and prevented you from getting employment. And throughout the late 40s and early 1950s, the Communist Party USA was pretty much illegal. After, you know, after the death of Stalin, it gradually came back into legality, just in time for Khrushchev to give his secret speech and say that, oh, everything about Stalin, all the stuff in American media about Stalin, it's all true. Stalin was a mass murderer. And then a whole bunch of the people left. And coming out of the 1950s, the Communist Party USA was just devastated. It was weak. During the late 1930s and even up through World War II, the Communist Party had been a very significant part of the Roosevelt coalition. But coming out of McCarthyism, they were completely fractured. They were very weak. There were not many of them left, probably less than 2,000 people total, but even smaller than that, probably. but as McCarthyism had ebbed, you'd had the New Left. And the New Left was anti-McCarthyism, a feeling that McCarthyism was hurting the interests of American imperialism. McCarthyism was dangerous, populism, etc. And liberal foundations and the CIA created what you call the New Left. And they had the Congress for Cultural Freedom and Partisan Review and the Ford Foundation. And, the New Left brought us the Civil Rights Movement, brought us protests against the Vietnam War. The New Left, kind of blossomed in the early 60s as young people that were interested in civil rights, that were opposed to the Vietnam War and didn't want to escalate the arms race. And there was a lot of liberal foundation money behind New Left protests. And this was the counterculture, the hippies and all that. So, the Communist Party had been destroyed, but then, out of that, you got the New Left. And among the New Left, some began to turn to communism. The USA entered a political crisis, 1968 through 1972. Students on the college campuses were burning their draft cards. The Black Panthers and the Black Liberation Movement emerged out of the Civil Rights Movement. And among young people that were interested had been marching for civil rights or had been opposing the Vietnam War, there was a layer of them that got interested in communism and became full-on communists. And that's the basis of the new communist movement. U.S. society began stabilizing after 1972, but at the same time, there was a layer of people who became communists. Now, what's interesting is in the 1930s, if you were a socialist, there were three groups. There was the Communist Party, the official Soviet-aligned Communist Party. There were the Trotskyites. Leon Trotsky had fought with Stalin. He had a breakaway group, the Fourth International. And there was the Socialist Party. That was the pro-imperialist, anti-communist, but pro-socialist, pro-social democratic party. That was it. There were three groups. Well, in this time period, in the 1970s, there were scores and scores of different groups. Some were pro-China, Maoist, some were Trotskyite, and there were even groups that were called anti-Semitic and fascist. And there was just a whole bunch of different groups that were formed. And that was a really big difference in the communist politics of the 70s. In the 1930s, there were three groups. You're in one of these three groups or you're not. But in this period, there were a bunch of different groups. Now, a pattern emerged during this time, and this is one thing I want to talk about, is that there were two groups in particular. And the first one was the National Caucus of Labor Committees, NCLC. Right? It was a Trotskyist who went by the name Lynn Marcus. Lyndon LaRouche was his legal name he was born with. He eventually reverted back to that. He went by Lynn Marcus. He was just a Trotskyist in New York City, and he had followers, and they formed the Labor Committee of SDS. They eventually became the National Caucus of Labor Committees. But they didn't go along with degrowth. They said that Malthusianism was not good, and they saw that a lot of the leftist groups were getting foundation money from the Ford Foundation and others to promote Malthusianism. They didn't go along with it. And then when there was a teachers' strike in 1968, and the teachers went on strike against Black community control of schools. They felt that Black community control of schools was an effort to weaken the labor unions, an effort to bring in austerity. And so they supported the teachers union going on strike against the Black nationalists. And all the other communist groups accused them of being anti-Semitic, of being fascist. And they, as far as they were concerned, they were just communists, right? They were Trotskyite communists who followed Lynn Marcus, but they were immediately accused of being fascist and white supremacist and all of this. And eventually, a couple of years later, they started getting into fistfights with the Communist Party. And that follows an odd pattern. And that happened with the National Caucus of Labor Committees in the early 70s. That happened, right? And eventually they retaliated with, what they called Operation Mop-Up, where they started fighting the Communist Party, and all the communist groups started defending the Communist Party from the National Caucus of Labor Committees. And eventually the LaRouche group dropped Marxism entirely, and they became, Republicans. They're around now. They're very important anti-imperialists. They advocate, peace with Russia and China, and they advocate what they call the American system. But they were originally a Trotskyist group that was immediately shunned because they wouldn't go along with the New Left. They were critical of the New Left. So that's important to keep in mind, right? And that, look, there's a reality is that communism in America, this is just a reality. It's not a conspiracy. There's various historical reasons for this, but especially in America, communism is very, very, very much Jewish. It's ethnically a Jewish-dominated thing. Not entirely. There's a lot of Irish Americans like William Z. Foster, a lot of African-American communist leaders, but the Communist Party of the United States in its heyday was very much a lot of Jewish folks, and that that the National Caucus of Labor Committees wouldn't play by the rules, and that especially after McCarthyism, leftist politics took on this very anti-populist character. And there is this kind of feeling that, you know, when all the non-Jews are getting together, right, that means they're going to, you know, kill all the Jews. They're going to have a pogrom or something like that. And there's this kind of anti-populist edge, you know, that you can talk about, you know, Lenin talked about the spirit of the ghetto. And so when the National Caucus of Labor Committees wouldn't follow the script of, oh, we have to support the black nationalists, and they supported the teachers union, which was, you know, a little more conservative, well, they immediately called them anti-Semitic and fascist. And that's kind of a pattern. And nowadays, the left is really anti-populist, right? I mean, the American people are the enemy as far as most of the left is concerned, which doesn't fit, you know, Marxism at all, right? Marxism is the working class majority against the capitalists. But, you know, there is a component to that. When I talk about crypto-Zionism, a lot of it is this idea that average Americans are the enemy. Average Americans, they're dangerous, you know. And I mean, I used to work at an insurance firm when I first moved to New York City. One of my coworkers was a Hasidic Jew, and he told me that every religion other than Judaism is just an excuse invented to kill Jews. Well, that's ridiculous, but that's the spirit of the ghetto, right? And I mean, there's reasons for this. Jewish people have been driven out of many different countries and faced huge persecution, and there kind of develops this insular thinking, right? My coworker also told me Martin Luther King Jr. was an anti-Semite. And I said, why? Well, because he organized black people. If any race starts organizing itself, it means they want to kill the Jews. Well, that's ridiculous also. But yet that's what they call the spirit of the ghetto, this feeling that the bulk of the population are dangerous bigots, and that we need to, you know, we can't be building any kind of mass movement that would empower them. That's the spirit of the ghetto. And Lenin condemned the spirit of the ghetto, right? If you read Lenin, who was of Jewish descent himself, he condemned what he called the spirit of the ghetto. The notion that the masses are the enemy, the notion that Jews could never assimilate, you know, that's called the spirit of the ghetto. And that because of McCarthyism, which was a very traumatic thing, you saw an enhancement kind of the spirit of the ghetto. And so this kind of shunning that the National Caucus of Labor Committees went through, it kind of matches the way communist politics in America was developing at the time and has developed. And that's important to keep in mind as well. So you have a whole bunch of these different groups, but they're all organizing around the same thing. There's an anti-war rally. They're all there. There's an anti-racist rally. They're all there. There's a labor union rally. They're all there. And they all kind of, even though they disagree with each other, for the most part, they all follow the same script, you know, which was whatever the left is doing, that's what they do. You know, and that's generally how it goes. But then there's another group called the Revolutionary Union, eventually became the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP. Now, the RU, or the Revolutionary Union, began as a split from the Weathermen, right? There was Students for a Democratic Society, was the mass campus anti-war activist group, civil rights activist group on the college campuses. It was called Students for a Democratic Society. The leaders of Students for a Democratic Society were called the Revolutionary Youth Movement. And they published a manifesto urging young people to support the Black Panthers, urging young people to support the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. And their manifesto was called "You Don't Need a Weatherman to Know Which Way the Wind Blows." The people who wrote that manifesto eventually became the terrorist bombing group. Well, the Revolutionary Union began as people that were in SDS that rejected terrorism, that said we don't want to engage in terrorism. We instead want to build a mass movement among white people that will align with the Black Panthers and be anti-imperialist. And that's what Fred Hampton urged them to do. And Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers supported the Revolutionary Union. They said, don't engage in terrorism, build a mass movement among your own people. You guys are white, we're black. And they had this theory called intercommunalism, which was the theory that the Black Panthers put forward, which is that, you know, people need to organize their own communities first, and then we'll eventually merge into one group. You know, and so the Black Panthers told the white activists in Students for a Democratic Society that rejected terrorism, go organize your own people. And so that's what the RU was, the Revolutionary Union. It was led by Bob Avakian, who was a guy from the San Francisco Bay Area. And the idea was they needed to go organize white workers to be anti-racist and to be anti-imperialist and to organize among the white working class. That's what the RU did. And that's what most of these groups did. All these groups were getting jobs in factories, etc. Right? But then something happened in 1974, which is that you had the anti-busing riots in Boston. And that basically the city of Boston implemented school desegregation. because the idea was that it wasn't enough to just have de facto segregation, right? The idea was that, that they didn't have a law that whites go to this school and blacks go to this school. But just like most major cities at the time, there was a white side of town and a black side of town. And the school on the black side of town was all black, and the school on the white side of town was all white. Well, there was a feeling that they needed to bus students to random schools to break down the racial gap in education, right? That separate but equal couldn't exist, and de facto segregation in education in public schools in Boston couldn't happen. And so they started busing kids to different schools, and there were riots against busing. A lot of the Irish, Polish, and Italian workers in Boston, mostly Irish. Boston is mainly an Irish city. They were racist. They didn't want their kids to go to school with black people. And so when desegregation was implemented, all kinds of awful things happened. People threw rocks at school buses, and it was an episode of ugly racist violence in Boston. Now we now know, though, that yes, the movement against busing was racist. However, we also now know that the support for busing from the ruling class was not coming from a good place, that the Ford Foundation and a lot of wealthy ruling class elements realized that in order to cut the wages of public sector workers and bring in austerity, they needed to break the urban political machines, right? And if you know anything about urban politics in America, New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, the urban political machines are ethnic. And it's still like that in New York City, right? If I were a public employee, I would immediately join the Irish Association. And if I were a public employee who was Jewish, I would join the Jewish Association. If I was Polish, I would join the Polish Association. And that government jobs in urban centers in America are handed out on an ethnic basis. So the ethnic neighborhoods in Boston, that were Irish or Polish or Italian, that was a layer of solidarity, right? Where all the cops were from the same ethnic group, all the sanitation workers and firemen were from the same ethnic group, and they would protect each other, and they wouldn't accept privatizations and cuts in public services. And the Ford Foundation determined that in order to cut public spending and get rid of government jobs and break public sector unions, you had to break apart the ethnic communities in urban centers. And so that's why the ultra rich, the Democrats and the liberals, were pushing for school desegregation. Plus, Black nationalists also opposed school desegregation. The Black Panthers said, we want black schools for black children. The Nation of Islam said, we want black schools for black children. That because of racism, they felt that black kids wouldn't get a fair shot at a school full of white kids, right? And so there were a lot of black nationalists who also opposed school desegregation. So it was a little more complicated. Yes, the mobs of people in Boston that were opposing busing, that were throwing rocks at school buses and using racial slurs, they were racist. They were coming from a bad place. But busing was also coming from a bad place. And there were black activists who opposed busing for their own reasons. It was complicated. Well, the Revolutionary Union, because they felt their job was to organize white workers to be anti-imperialist, they supported the Boston busing riots, right? And I believe I actually have the headline. I think I might have the image of they actually published, do I still have it? I think I had it. I have the image of the infamous headline in their newspaper. Let me see if I can pull it up. I don't have it on my screen, but I actually want to show it to you. Busing. I actually want to pull up the image of it because it's kind of shocking that a communist group would take this position. But if you look at the context, it makes sense. And I want to pull up the image because it's quite a bit of a shocking thing. But this was the actual headline of the RCP newspaper that they published, opposing busing and basically supporting the racist riots. And if I could just find the headline, scrolling up. Right. I want to actually show the actual headline because it's somewhat infamous. Yeah, where is it? Where is it? Trying to find I want to find the actual document. Yeah. I want to actually show you the image. I thought I had it, but let me see if I can find it for you. Well, I don't have the actual headline. I have an image of the headline somewhere. But yeah. Yeah, where is it? Yeah, I would like to just show the actual image. Okay, well, I can't find. Where is it? I've had this image before. Where? Yeah. Oh well, I'll have to show it to you later. I think I sent it to Noah when he was making a video. Noah made a video on this very topic, and I think I sent him the image at the time. So maybe if Noah, if you still have it in your phone, send it to me. I'd like to put it on the screen, but I don't know where it went. So yeah. But yeah. Yeah, I'd like to put the image on the screen of the busing position that they took. Oh, here it is. Yeah, here's the image. I've got it. All right. Sorry. Took me a while to find it. Here's the infamous headline of the RCP newspaper about busing. Which, I mean, it's kind of shocking that they would take this position, but it kind of makes sense, right? You have a group of white workers that are fighting against something. You have the Black Panthers opposing it. And even though the leftist position would be to support integration, you have a communist group that opposes this. I actually did a whole video with Academic Agent on this very, very topic. So here's the infamous headline of the RCP newspaper. People must unite to smash the Boston busing plan, right? That was the headline. That was the position that the RU, Revolutionary Union, took, that they opposed school busing. And when they defended their position, they wrote in the article, it's actually in this article that's on the screen there, they wrote, quote, "Those who think the way to stand with Black people and other oppressed nationalities is to attack white workers as simply a bunch of racists who think the ruling class is a friend of the oppressed, can at best only drag the tail of the struggle, and if they continue in this path, can only end up falling backwards completely into the camp of the ruling class." Now, that's a good point, right? I mean that if you are trying to fight the imperialists, and instead of trying to organize the bulk of the white working class to oppose imperialism, you just dismiss them as a bunch of racists. And if you turn to the ruling class as a friend of the oppressed, you're not going to be on the revolutionary road for very long. And actually, I think their position on busing was mistaken. I don't think they should have supported the busing riots. But actually, that statement is very, very on point. Because if you look at the way that communist groups are in America right now, they're appealing to the ruling class. They're defending the FBI. They're supporting U.S. imperialism and its, fight against Russia in Ukraine, and its efforts to, attack Russia via the proxy of Ukraine. And they've fallen over backwards into the hand of the ruling class on the basis of the position that, because everyone who voted for Trump is a big fat racist, therefore we just have to follow the Democrats. So, there's truth in this. But anyhow, the other thing is that during these years, the RCP actually did something quite effective, which is they built what was called the Right to Strike Committee of West Virginia. And there were tens of thousands of working class people in West Virginia who were members of the miners union who joined this RCP-led group called the Right to Strike Committee. And there were congressional investigations of it. And There were federal prosecutions of leaders of the Right to Strike Committee for organizing and breaking federal injunctions, etc. There was it's kind of amazing. You read about the Right to Strike Committee, right? Read the New York Times articles. It was kind of amazing. So as much as the RCP, I mean, you could say that they were probably the biggest of the Maoist communist groups during this years. They were still very small, but in West Virginia, they had a significant following. And they took this position on busing that made them stand out. So anyway, all of this leads to 1976. And basically what was done to the National Caucus of Labor Committees was done to the RU or the RCP. Immediately, they were declared racist, fascist. I think they were banned from the National Hard Times Conference, and they were considered to be enemies. They were just like the National Caucus of Labor Committees was declared a pariah because of their position on the teachers' strike in New York City. They also declared, the RU, they were anti-Semites and white supremacists and, all of this. Again, this, and Max Elbaum, who wrote the book Revolution in the Air, said the RU dug in its heels, but for the first time faced not just criticism, but complete isolation. Outside of its own milieu, however, RCP had become a near pariah. Between the fall of 1974 and 1975, it shifted from having criticism of the RU to seeing it as outside of Marxism-Leninism altogether, right? You're not a communist. You're actually a fascist. Does that sound familiar to anybody? You're a white supremacist, right? The left that has the spirit of the ghetto, that thinks any kind of populist movement is actually white supremacy, shunned the RCP, and they were shunned. And they were declared fascists and Nazis. Sound familiar? Anyhow, so what happened? Well, there were two protests against the Bicentennial that happened in 1976. And one of them was called Bicentennial Without Colonies. And it was about 30,000 people. And it was a wide variety of causes. The biggest group among them was the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. Bicentennial Without Colonies. About 30,000 people showed up in Philadelphia for the Bicentennial Without Colonies rallies. It is very, very hard to find any photos of that rally, I must say. There's a couple, right? Here's one photo I was able to dig up. And it's actually from an article that was just published. Here's like a crowd of people, money for jobs, housing and healthcare, education, not for a bicentennial of racism, poverty, and colonialism. July 4th, Philadelphia Coalition, right? There's one photo from the Bicentennial Without Colonies rally. And here's another photo from Bicentennial Without Colonies. There's a group of Native Americans. Apparently they bust in Native Americans from Native American reservations, brought in some Native Americans to protest. I guess they had the money from the billionaires, millionaires. They bust in Native Americans, right? Trying to see if there's other photographs from Bicentennial Without Colonies. Right. I guess this is, right. Another photo from it, right? Freedom for all oppressed, right? Bicentennial Without Colonies, freedom for oppressed nationalities, equality and jobs for all. Yeah, that's about it, right? There's not many images. Oh, here's another one, right? I was able to find. As long as colonies, liberty is dead. Free Puerto Rico, right? And that was the bigger rally. It was about 30,000 people supposedly that were at this rally. And the RCP, the Revolutionary Communist Party, had a much smaller rally. They had their own rally with about 3,000 people at it. So their rally is 10 times smaller than the Bicentennial Without Colonies rally, except their rally has a way, way bigger impact. For example, the most famous thing that comes out of this rally is a photo of the veterans contingent at their rally. They had the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, which was run by the RCP during these years. And that was the Vietnam Veterans Against the War contingent at the RCP rally. The RCP rally, they called it, "We've carried the rich for 200 years. Now let's dump them off our backs." That's what they called the rally. And this was the poster that they made for the rally. And they did a lot of theatrical stuff. They hung a banner from the Statue of Liberty. which is something that if you did now, they'd put you in jail for a really long time. But back then, they didn't have as strict penalties for that kind of thing. And so they went to the Statue of Liberty and they hung, they hung this poster from it, right? Hold on, I gotta get some images out of here. They hung this poster, from it. We've carried the rich for 200 years, right? Now let's get them off our backs, right? That was the poster that they put up, right? You've carried the rich for 200 years. Now let's get them off our backs. That was the poster that the RCP made for their rally. And they had the Vietnam veterans contingent. We won't fight another rich man's war. Jobs or income now. And I'll show you some other pictures from their rally that they had. Right. This is, a black woman with her child there. We've carried the rich for 200 years. Let's get them off our backs. Right. There's even, I even found, as I was looking for images of the Bicentennial Without Colonies rally, I actually found images of the RCP rally. And I want to show this to you because it's wild. I mean, it just shows you how much of an impact. Even when I Googled images of Bicentennial Without Colonies, it was hard to find them. But here's another image of the RCP's, these men died for Beth Steele's profits, get the rich off our backs, right? All right. It's like the steel worker contingent that they had. They had their members that worked in steel, right? Fight layoffs, right? The RCP's rally had a big impact. And so I'm going to pull up a couple different news articles from the time. This is the New York Times article. And I'm just going to read you. The New York Times gave a short article about both rallies. Tucked miles away from the official celebration of the nation's 200th birthday, demonstrators estimated at more than 30,000 rallied for their own idea of an American revolution. Despite repeated pre-actions of violence by Mayor Rizzo, who asked for 15,000 federal troops to preserve calm in Philadelphia, the marchers were peaceful and orderly. The main counter-demonstration filled a golf driving range in Fairmount Park with an assortment of Puerto Rican nationalists, blacks, Indians, women's rights activists, various organizations, and homosexual groups. In another part of town, a smaller group called Rich Off Our Backs marched perhaps 3,000 people to a scruffy square of Norris Park. The march moved through the rundown black areas of North Philadelphia, where the windows of the abandoned buildings are covered with tin, indecipherable graffiti. Only one United States flag was seen on a drive of dozens of blocks through North Philadelphia. And that kind of makes sense because among the black community, there was a feeling that, that U.S. imperialism was not their, they were not Americans. They felt they were black people, an oppressed nation. So it makes sense there wouldn't be a lot of American flags in the black community on July 4th. The heavily Puerto Rican element in the larger demonstration at Fairmount Park was organized by the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, which calls for Puerto Rican independence from the United States. The party's secretary, Juan Mari Bras, was a featured speaker. One of the major themes at this demonstration was sponsored by a group called the July 4th Coalition was Bicentennial Without Colonies. The scene was an echo of the protests of the 60s as the crowd in dungarees and T-shirts and carrying flags and banners stretched out in front of a speaker's platform where Elaine Brown of the Black Panthers charged that the country's history was one of murder and plunder. Dave Dellinger, the peace activist, began his speech by remarking that President Ford's bicentennial speech was so bad that some of the people thought he wrote it himself. Right? So he took a dig at a Republican president. Right? That's so revolutionary. Took a dig at a Republican president, right? Stuck it to the man. And then it goes on. Karen DeCrow, the president of the National Organization for Women, reread a speech which Susan B. Anthony disrupted a celebration in 1876 centennial to indicate that women have made relatively little progress. Witchcraft Rebellion, described as women's anti-imperialist singing group, brought the crowd to its feet with a song whose refrain was, "Who's the guilty one? Ain't it the one who pulls the strings? Ain't it Rockefeller?" Earlier in the morning, Rich Off Our Backs group, which included a contingent of Vietnam veterans in their old fatigues, marching to radical slogans set to military cadence, held their demonstration. Their thrust was an economic analysis. They want to put the blame exactly where it lies, on the rich of society, said a young black steel worker in the march, explaining his distinction from the larger group. Well, so even the New York Times can tell that one rally is a circus. It's, you know, they're gay and they got witchcraft singers and the Puerto Ricans and the Native Americans and they're up there, and, you know, one group, it's about every cause you ever heard of under the sun. And, you know, and this other group is got an economic message. We've carried the rich for 200 years. Now let's get them off our backs, right? One is just a collection of everyone that's got any grievance against America about anything. And the other had a very, very clear message, right? And that's why we have an image now of one of these rallies. This image is immortal, and it's very, very hard to find images of the other rally. This message is very, very clear. You get it. We won't fight another rich man's war. But I can't find an image that is in any way as defining of the other rally because it wasn't as clear. But here is, I guess I got to clear out some images here, but here is the article that the RCP ran about their rally. I'm just going to read it to you too. It's also pretty short. But you know, this is the article the RCP wrote about the two rallies. So here we go. Here we go. Right? Opportunist march lets the rich off the hook. It was quite a hodgepodge, a bicentennial without colonies, end to forced sterilization, vote socialist workers, down with apartheid, ho, homosexual, sodomy laws are ineffectual, food for people, not for profit. These were among the dozens of chants and banners that came bobbing through the picnic-like atmosphere in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia for the July 4th Coalition Bicentennial demonstration. Organized mainly by the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee, the public wing of the Weather Underground, or Weatherman, the march and rally drew a crowd of between 12 and 15,000, including mostly young people and a few workers. Most of those who came had genuine hatred for some of the crimes of the capitalist system, like the colonial oppression of Puerto Rico, and many had a genuine desire to fight the ruling class. Others came to a parade around causes like sexual degeneracy, right? Let me see if I can find the other image. All right. Okay. Just, yeah. Right? Even before the 4th, the media had paid more attention to the Rich Off Our Backs coalition, although the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and Prairie Fire Organizing Committee led group was predicting a turnout of 70,000 for their march. The Rich Off Our Backs July 4th demonstration was something new to the high and mighty, and their press nervously reported on workers taking part in it and the discipline and determination of the coalition members, the three militant slogans that aimed the demonstration straight at the ruling class. The same July 5th Chicago Tribune article that embraced the other march fretted that Rich Off Our Backs demonstration had been a, quote, a portent of the type of confrontations that may await Americans in the country's third century. The two demonstrations on July 4th show one thing crystal clear. While 1,001 abuses of the capitalists heap on people every day constantly breed anger and resistance, only the growing workers' movement can bring together and focus those battles into a powerful storm against the rich who plan to ride us for another 200 years. So basically, one rally was a revolutionary rally that said we need to organize and unite against the rich. We won't fight another rich man's war. We've carried the rich for 200 years. Now let's get them off our backs. And the other rally was just a collection of, you know, what we would now call woke identity politics, every different cause you ever heard of, and, you know, witches and homosexuals and Trotskyites and anarchists and this ethnic group and that ethnic group. And the other, they brought black and white together and they said, we need to fight the ruling class. And even though one rally was much smaller than the others, it had a much bigger impact. So I just wanted to read you, those are the two historical articles about the two rallies that happened. One was 10 times smaller than the other, but yet it had a way bigger impact. Now, what happened afterwards? Okay. And this is depressing. And this is, again, these times were very different than the times we live in now. Let's just kind of go on what happened after. July 4th, 1976. Well, there's a really awful document. I'm not even going to link in here because I don't believe in character assassination that came out. Red Papers 8. And basically, Bob Avakian, the leader of the RCP, it's alleged, I don't know if it's true and I don't care. It's alleged he had a psychotic break, at some point, right? And was hospitalized, was suicidal or something. Well, I'm sorry if that happened. That's a very sad thing if it happened. But I mean, that a bunch of people quit the RCP and they put out this document accusing Bob Avakian of being mentally ill. And they compared him to Terry Eagleton, who had been like a Democratic VP candidate in 1972 and had been dropped from the ticket when it was revealed he'd had mental health issues. They called him the Terry Eagleton of the left. It was just a character assassination. And the RCP broke with China, right? And Avakian and his followers opposed China. The people who left the RCP continued supporting China. The people that left the RCP are now called Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And the people that stayed with the RCP, it's still the RCP. Bob Avakian has his little group. And so they broke with China. And then when Deng Xiaoping came to the White House in 1979 to establish diplomatic relations with China, they had a Death to Deng Xiaoping rally. And they kind of became what they'd been formed to oppose. They became like the Weathermen. They engaged in street, they didn't bomb anything, but they engaged in like street confrontations. And the RCP has kind of deteriorated into an ultra-leftist group. And, they've apologized profusely for their busing position. And they're just another one of the woke groups. I react to some of their content here, all of that, right? Another thing that happened around the same time, and I think this is very interesting, is the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the anti-communist religious leader from South Korea. He had 2 bicentennial rallies of his own. One was in Yankee Stadium, and the other was in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. And a lot of Republican congressmen spoke at it. And it was actually kind of smart. It showed this religious group that was considered somewhat fringe in America because they were anti-communist, and they became very, very patriotic. And they had a series of patriotic bicentennial rallies of their own, where they got Republican congressmen and prominent ministers to speak at them. And I think I may actually be able to show some footage of their bicentennial rally. I think I may actually, there's like a short film of their Yankee Stadium rally. I'm not going to show the whole thing, but I'll just show you they kind of gained influence. This was as they kind of were gaining influence among Republicans. They staged like patriotic anti-communist bicentennial rallies, and they had one in Yankee Stadium in New York City, and it was quite massive. So I'm going to put that on. I'm just downloading the video of that. So that happened around this time. So yeah, I'll put the image of that on because I think that's kind of fascinating. And that the Unification Church is now one of the main groups that has advocated peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula and reconciliation with North Korea. And and so and at CPI, we've had a friendship relationship with them. And so I want to show you just kind of what they were doing at the same time, right? They were very, very anti-communist. And so obviously they wanted nothing to do with these communist groups during these years. And they were kind of solidifying themselves among Republicans, and this is the group that eventually started the Washington Times newspaper. And so I'll put their bicentennial rally. I'll show you a little bit of their bicentennial rally that they had, right? I'll show you some of that. Hold on. All right, here we go. All right, yeah, this is some of their bicentennial rally that they had. Here we go.
1976. Throughout the land, people are celebrating our nation's 200th birthday. Most of these activities commemorate events in America's past. Actually, America has very deep spiritual roots. The Pilgrims sought religious freedom and the chance to do God's will. The Declaration of Independence acknowledged the protection of divine providence. Confusion, an even more amazing scene takes place. Instead of running for shelter, members, their parents, and guests refuse to be defeated by the storm. This impromptu singing creates an unprecedented high spirit of unity and brotherhood all throughout the stadium. It is a united prayer, a deep-hearted petition to God for sunshine, and the prayer is answered. "30 minutes later, almost as dramatically as the rain began, the storm ends. It is a miracle. The stadium is quickly cleared and redecorated. In spite of the violent rainstorm, the people come. More than 45,000 people attend the Bicentennial God Bless America Festival, an outstanding turnout. The president of the Bicentennial God Bless America Committee, Mr. Neil Albert Salonen, opens the exciting festival.
This evening, it's inspiring to see so many tens of thousands of people that have come together to celebrate the birth of this nation and also to give thanks to God for the blessings that He's given us.
인정을 묻지 않고 신앙을 가리지 않고 문화변화를 문제 삼지 않습니다. 이 지상 어느 곳에서 어떤지 간에 내 집이라 할 수 있는 나라 이것이 바로 미국입니다.
The people of America have come from every corner of the world. To be an American does not depend upon what race you are, what belief you have, or what cultural background you are from. It is only in this nation that no matter where you come from, you can proudly say, this is my country. That is America.
그러므로 미국은 세계의 축사세요 선미의 뜻 가운데 특별히 기름 부어 세우시고 더 육성하면서 짧은 200년간의 풍성한 축복을 주저하신 나라인 것을 분명히 알아야 합니다.
America is a microcosm of the world. In His providence, God anointed America with oil. He poured out abundant blessing upon this land. In a short 200 years, God raised this nation to be the mightiest nation on earth.
그러나 지금 미국이 국제신앙은 땅에 떨어지고 여역은 죄악의 도성이요 악마의 도시로 화해가고 있습니다. 미국 전역에 이와 같이 사탄이 주인이 될 때 하나님은 외면하실 수밖에 없고 급기야 미국을 떠나실 수밖에 없게 될 것입니다. 지금이 바로 그런 때인 것을 똑똑히 알아야 합니다.
Today, however, the world has lost faith in America, and New York has become a jungle of immorality and depravity. God has been forgotten in this country, and if forgotten, God can only live America. Now is the very moment that this is taking place.
이 생민족의 통합이 힘이 되었던 하나님께서 떠났으니 가정은 파탄되고 교회는 분열하여 이 나라는 세포가 썩어가는 인처처럼 온통 치명적으로 병들었습니다. 이때 총을 서서 공산주의의 불결에 이 나라를 성도리째 삼키려 하고 있습니다.
When the unifying force of God leaves America, nothing will be able to hold America together. The family will break down. Churches will divide. And America will become mostly ill because the cells of her body are decaying. This will be the perfect opportunity for the evil of communism to overtake America.
사랑하는 미국 시민 여러분, 하나님이 진로를 두려워하면서 크게 회개하여야 할 때는 왔습니다. 하나님을 중심한 진정한 초인정주의자라야, 초국가주의자라야, 초세계주의자라야, 그리고 이러한 가정과 교회와 국가를 가진 것을 자랑으로 생각하는 자라야 진정한 미국인이라 하겠습니다. 하나님의 눈에는 흑인도 백인도 황인도 없습니다.
Beloved American people, the time has come that we must repent. We must fear the wrath of God.
Anyhow, so yeah, that was what the Unification Church did. That was their big anti-communist rally in Yankee Stadium. So what happened, right? There was the Cult Awareness Network was emerging during these times. So basically 2 years later, 1978, San Francisco, which had been a center of the new communist movement, San Francisco experienced some pretty crazy events. They elected a mayor who was a kind of like a Mamdani figure, I would say. He was, I'd say probably Mamdani is like the most far left mayor we've ever had since him, George Moscone. And, in downtown San Francisco, George Moscone Center is like the convention center. When I was in San Francisco a few years ago for the Asia Pacific, the Central Pacific, the event with Xi Jinping, it was at Moscone Center. I got to see Moscone Center. They elected this guy as mayor, George Moscone. He was like a Bernie Sanders or a Mamdani figure, like a social democrat, right? Maybe not as far left as Mamdani, but he was pretty far left. George Moscone. And George Moscone was the mayor. And George Moscone had a relationship with Reverend Jim Jones. Reverend Jim Jones was the head of the People's Temple, which was a religious sect that claimed to combine Christianity and communism. And, they supported the Soviet Union. They were friendly with the Soviet embassy, etc. And, he appointed Jim Jones to be the head of the housing board of San Francisco. Reverend Jim Jones, was a leader. And there was a lot of communist groups in San Francisco who had come together to elect George Moscone as the mayor of San Francisco. And then Harvey Milk was on the board of aldermen, which is like the city council in San Francisco. And Harvey Milk was the first openly gay elected official. And he'd also gotten elected with the support of Jim Jones and with a lot of communist groups. And evidence began, there was evidence of abuse that had gone on in Reverend Jim Jones' organization. So Jim Jones took all of his followers out of the country and they moved to Guyana. And then in 1978, they committed mass suicide in November of 1978. And then George Moscone was killed and shot in City Hall and killed. And so was Harvey Milk. And they were both assassinated by a former police officer. And then Dianne Feinstein became mayor of San Francisco. And basically there was a purge of the far left of San Francisco. That the kind of Soviet-friendly wing of San Francisco local government of the Democratic Party in San Francisco was removed after the Jonestown incident, the mass suicide. The George Moscone was assassinated, and Harvey Milk was assassinated, and it's interesting because now that the Dianne Feinstein machine, if you will, that eventually brought us Nancy Pelosi and all that. That's where they came in. There was like a purge in the Democratic Party in the late 70s where they got rid of the communist-friendly wing of San Francisco politics. Moscone was the purge of Moscone was kind of a turning point. The Iranian Revolution happened in 1979. You had the hostage crisis where many people felt like America was being embarrassed. And you had the Down with Iran rallies, the mobilizations, bring back our hostages. That led to Ronald Reagan being victorious. And after the rise of Ronald Reagan, U.S. society stabilized to some degree, right? You had the entrance of the late Cold War normal. that I've talked about that really held until the end of the Bush years, right? The late Cold War normal in American politics. And Ronald Reagan said, we're all friends after 6 o'clock, and the divisions of the ruling class were over. So, yeah, that's really the history there. That 1976, the USA had been coming out of a political upsurge in 1968 to 1972. Communist groups were organizing in the factories. You had two big communist rallies against the Bicentennial rally. You had divisions in the ruling class. And then all of that led into the Reagan Revolution. And the Reagan Revolution, it led to U.S. society stabilizing for the next 30 years, right? When I was a kid in the 90s, U.S. society was very prosperous and very stable, right? The kind of the turmoil of the era kind of ended by 1981, 1982. Things were very, very normal in the United States. That late Cold War normal, the heyday of the neocons had come into existence. The reason that I bring all of that up is because it's important history. And that, again, we're not living in the same times, but there are some similarities. Number one, I view this photo and the way this rally was organized as really, really important. They had a message. We need to oppose the ruling class. We need to fight for the working class. We won't fight another rich man's war. That's the kind of messaging I want to have. And that, and also the way the left gangs up on anybody who talks this way, even though this is supposed to be, this seems like the basic message of what any communist group would believe. If you're the National Caucus of Labor Committees, or if you're the RCP, and you talk this way, the left gangs up on you and calls you a white supremacist and a fascist and calls you evil if you talk this way. Well, that's certainly a parallel to our times. The other thing I'll mention is that there's a lot of nostalgia nowadays, right? There's a lot of nostalgia for the 1980s. It's kind of weird. When I was a kid, there was nostalgia for the 60s. I remember when I was a teenager, they had a Beatles rollout, all these TV specials about the Beatles. All the Beatles albums came out on CD. But now there's a lot of nostalgia for the 1980s. And there's another movie that I saw that was kind of a historical film. It was about the Jesus people in the 1970s and how that led to the rise of the religious right in the 1980s. It was a movie that came out. I might put the trailer on here a little bit, but it was a movie that came out 2 or 3 years ago. And I'll just tell you that it was enjoyable to watch. It was about the kind of the confusion of the 1960s hippies leading a lot of people to become religious. But the happy ending, I was sitting there shaking my head no during the happy ending. I'll just put the trailer for Jesus Revolution on. I'm not going to show you the whole movie. I'll just show you some of the trailer because I mean, the happy ending was not a happy ending for humanity. And that's kind of, what I want to kind of get to here. I'll touch on this a little bit. But yeah, Jesus Revolution, it's this movie about, Calvary Chapel, which was like a church in the Southern California area that became kind of ground zero for the Jesus people and the kind of the embracing of counterculture aesthetics and Christian rock and roll and things like that. And they made this Hollywood movie kind of romanticizing them. I think it was 2-3 years ago this movie came out. And I saw the movie in the theater with my wife. I enjoyed the movie. It was kind of an inspiring story, but at the end, they started showing the credits and then the religious right became really prominent in the 1980s. And I'm watching it and I'm like, this is not a happy ending, right? This is the trailer for the movie. I'll just mute it, right? But it shows, all these hippies and they're confused and, they eventually become evangelical Christians and isn't that nice? And it talks about the founding of Calvary Chapel and it's kind of a love story, whatever. But the happy ending that comes on in the movie, though, it ends with the Reagan Revolution. And the Reagan Revolution was mass incarceration of Black people, the war on drugs, millions of Black people locked in prison, and just the rise of the police state in the Black community. It was the Contras in Nicaragua and the funding of extremists and terrorists in South America, ugly civil war in Guatemala, slaughtering indigenous people, ugly civil war in Nicaragua, ugly civil war in El Salvador. And if you think we have a mass migration problem today, that millions of people are pouring into our country, that's because of what was done during the 1980s with the drug cartels. Oh, that was also funding Al-Qaeda to fight the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. The USA and the CIA giving loads of money to Osama bin Laden to go and fight against the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, and the rise of Al-Qaeda and Wahhabism and Islamic extremism to fight the Soviet Union. And, it was also the beginning of deindustrialization. That's when the factories started closing down. The 1980s, the religious right was at the center of it. Ronald Reagan and Jerry Falwell were very close and all of that. But things in America and things globally really got worse. And then when the fall of the Soviet Union happened, you had mass starvation and, Russia lost 10% of their population in the 1990s. And so I'm sitting there in the movie theater. It's kind of a nice, inspiring story. It's these hippies are all becoming evangelicals, giving up drugs and all of that. But the happy ending, I'm just like, no, that wasn't a happy ending for America. The 90s was a bad time in South America, a bad time in Eastern Europe. The 80s was a bad time in the Middle East, the rise of Al-Qaeda and the Contra terrorist groups and mass incarceration for the Black community in America. It's like, and that's what kind of gets left out of all of this. And a lot of people on the right now, and that's what's interesting, is a lot of people on the right know that, and they should know better. Right? There's a lot of people on the right, on the libertarian right wing, Tucker Carlson fans and all of that will go and watch Jesus Revolution and think it's just a great story, and they'll hate communists or whatever. But then they know that the USA funded Osama bin Laden. They know the war on drugs was a disaster. They know about deindustrialization and NAFTA and getting rid of all of our jobs. Well, all of that was thrust forward. You couldn't have done that without the so-called Jesus Revolution, right? That the neoconservative politics with which the evangelical Christian right of the 1980s and 90s was aligned, they're the ones that did all those evil things, even though they have a Trotskyist background, a lot of them, which is even another story. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say about the history there. So I'm going to put on the song 200 Years. That was the theme song of this. And then I want to talk about a couple more things before we open it up to questions. But yeah, if you've got any questions for the second half of the show, go to Buy Me a Coffee. A couple people have sent questions in, which I appreciate. But yeah, we're going to put on the 200 Years song. This was the song the RCP recorded to promote their 200 Years rally. So we'll put that on.
When I get home from work each day, it feels like I just worked 200 years. When I see all the bills I gotta pay, seem like to take 200 years. And now we hear this summer celebrate the latest boss's game. But who they calling us when every day we're fighting them? 200 years. 200 years is bicentennial is home. 200 years. The rich want us to slave for them. 200 more. 200 years. 200 years these parasites have sucked our blood. But let's get them off our backs. 200 years is long enough. Well, that must have been some party dumped that British tea back then 200 years. And that must have been some struggle dumping British tyranny back 200 years. But soon King George packing made the rich here free to build their own empire and change and wage slavery. 200 years. 200 years. This bicentennial is for 200 years. The rich want us to slave for them. 200 more. 200 years. These parasites have sucked our blood. Let's get them off our backs. 200 years is long enough. Well, our class built this country. We have labored, we have slaved 200 years. But they're the class that runs it, taking all the wealth we've made 200 years.
They're coming down, their time is up. 200 years is long.
Their rule has brought us misery, unemployment, crime, and war. But every decent thing we have, our class has fought on for.
200 years.
200 years.
This bicentennial is for 200 years.
The rich want us to slave for them. 200 more.
200 years.
200 years. These parasites have sucked our blood. Let's get them off our backs. 200 years is long enough. finest minds to find out how their system's gonna last 200 years.
It's coming down, their time is up, 200 years is long.
And they're working overtime to cover up the past 200 years.
They're coming down, their time is up, 200 years is long.
They promise peace and plenty as they plan another war. But they've got a little problem, we're not taking any more.
200 years,
200 years, this
bicentennial is for 200 years.
The rich want us to slave for them 200 more.
200 years,
200 years, these parasites that suck our blood. Let's get them off our backs. 200 years is long enough. Fellow workers, to our class belongs the future, and it isn't going to wait 200 years. Oh no. Well, the rich man's time is up, and he's going to get the cake in a few more years. And with their system in museums, with the relics of the past, we'll build that bright future when the workers rule at last. 200 years, 200 years, this bicentennial is for 200 years. Want us to slave for them 200 more, 200 years, 200 years, these parasites that suck our blood. Let's get them off our backs. 200 years is long enough. We'll bring them down. Their time is up. 200 years is long enough. We'll bring them down. Their time is up. 200 years is long enough. We'll bring them down. Their time is up. 200 years is long enough.
200 years,
200 years.
this bicentennial is for 200 years.
The rich want us to slave for them 200 more. 200 years. 200 years. These parasites that suck our blood. Let's get them off our backs. Say, let's get them off our backs. All right, let's get them off our backs. 200 years is long enough.
So I wanted to say a couple more things. That's all I'm going to say about the two rallies. You know, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary, the 250th anniversary of America, 50th anniversary of that incident I just kind of described there in my history tonight. But I want to talk about a couple things that are related. Why am I even talking about this? Because we need a movement. We urgently need a movement in our time. And that's what CPI is dedicated to building. We are dedicated to building a movement. And that is the only thing that's going to get us out of the crisis that we're in, is a movement. And, you know, trust me, if I didn't think a movement was necessary, I wouldn't be doing this, right? Some people continue. I don't know where this legend comes from that I'm getting rich off of CPI. I am definitely not getting rich off CPI. I'm losing money on CPI. People continue to come up with this claim that I'm getting rich off CPI. I am not. You know, and there are people in my organization who have the bank account records. They can show you that I spend lots of money to make sure CPI happens. But, you know, we urgently need a movement, and we urgently need a mass movement of anti-imperialists aimed at mobilizing the American people to oppose these wars and to build for a government of action that'll fight for working families. And that's what I am dedicated to doing. And I have spent lots of my money and lots of my time in making it happen because it's urgently needed. And, you know, you look at what we did and you look at what we're doing. We need to build a community of people who can carry out anti-imperialist operations. That's what we're doing. And we are actually doing it, right? And there's a lot of people talking. And I have gotten to the point where I'm really not listening to what these other people said. It came to my attention. Somebody messaged me this morning that a certain person had talked about me. I didn't even listen to it. And I'm proud of myself for not listening to it because I just don't care at this point. Look, 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago? It's got to be 3 years ago now. You know, CPI, the first book we ever published was Gaddafi's Green Book. We published our own edition of Gaddafi's Green Book, and it's still our top seller. It's an important book, right? Do I have an image of it I can put on the screen? We published our own edition of Gaddafi's Green Book. And that was partially because my disagreements with the Workers' World Party that I come out of were related to the Green Book. you know, and were related to Gaddafi, and that it was to make a statement. And it's also the fact that the left wasn't there for Libya and didn't oppose, you know, the bombing of Libya and didn't build a movement to oppose it, shows the need for CPI to exist. And so the first book that CPI ever published was the Green Book by Gaddafi. And I'm proud of that. I mean, it's a great thing that we did. And it was 2 or 3 years ago now, somebody who didn't like us in the Communist Party, you know, it got back to me. And actually, I think someone even tweeted at me what they had been told by this person who doesn't like us in the Communist Party, was making fun of us because they saw us. We were at a pro-Cuba solidarity rally in New York City, and some of our members were going around and selling the Green Book. And they thought, oh, that's crazy. That's silly. Why would they sell the Green Book? And, you know, I thought about that. And like my first response was, the person said, well, why would any working class person care about the Green Book by Gaddafi? That was their response. Like, oh my God, look at CPI. They're selling the Green Book by Gaddafi. Why would any working class person, why would American workers care about the Green Book by Gaddafi? And after this was being repeated by somebody in the Communist Party, and it got tweeted at me, and I tweeted back at them, and I said, well, the American people are overwhelmingly against these wars. And one of these wars was against the government of Libya. And Libya has been in chaos ever since, and there's refugees. And I think a lot of Americans would be curious as to what economic system Libya had and what their beliefs were. And now there's all this talk of socialism with Bernie Sanders and all of this. You know, Gaddafi has a very different understanding of what socialism is. You know, I think a lot of working people would be interested in the Green Book. First. Second, you know, we weren't at the working class. We weren't standing outside a factory gate. We were at a Cuba solidarity rally. So people that are at a Cuba solidarity rally are already anti-imperialist, and Cuba and Libya were very close politically. They were countries that had very good relations. So, you know, I think it was perfectly fine that we were doing it. But here's the point. Beyond even that, right? Put that aside, right? Put aside that I think a lot of working people would be interested in Gaddafi's teachings. Put that aside, right? At the end of the day, my response to this person really should be, oh, you're right. You know, you think that working people in America aren't interested in the Green Book by Gaddafi. Okay. So when you published a book about healthcare for all and why, you know, capitalism needs to be overthrown and distributed it among working people in America, how did that go? Oh, wait, you didn't do that, did you? You know, or oh, imagine that we hadn't published the Green Book by Gaddafi. Would you then like CPI? Would you then be saying positive things about CPI? Oh no, you'd still hate us. You'd still find another reason to hate us, you know? And at the end of the day, like, the overwhelming majority of people who criticize CPI, I would say 99% of them, will never approve of CPI no matter what we do. They're not doing any real mass outreach or efforts to build anti-imperialism themselves that they can say are any better. They're just nattering, right? I think Richard Nixon, or Spiro Agnew, his vice president, he talked about the nattering nabobs of negativism. There's a huge amount of nattering nabobs of negativism that they're really not doing anything to advance anti-imperialism. Like the Communist Party USA, the overwhelming majority of members, they do nothing but pay their dues, right? It's a placeholder organization. You know, they really do very, very little. But, you know, this woman who's in the Communist Party, oh, how dare Caleb and his CPI go out there with the Green Book? Well, we went out there with the Green Book because we want to oppose the wars. We were at a Cuba rally. So what? You know, and again, is there something you know, if we did something other than the Green Book, would you like us? No. If we, you know, if are you doing something better to oppose anti-imperialism among the masses of Americans? No. And so it's like, we just don't have time for you, right? If this person were joining CPI and said, hey, rather than Gaddafi's Green Book, I think we should be doing X, Y, and Z, and they were serious about actually helping us get it done, do it, I would listen to them. But the overwhelming majority of people who criticize CPI aren't doing anything. They're definitely not going to help us, and they're not doing what we aim to do, which is build an anti-imperialist movement among the broad masses of America. So why do we care what they think? Why do we care what they think? Look, the overwhelming majority of people that agree with what we say on these streams politically, or at least sympathize with, Russia and China against US imperialism, the overwhelming majority of people that have these political views, unfortunately, are not activists. They're not. And it just becomes this internet podcast contest. My podcast is better than your podcast. I get more clicks and likes and shares than you. You're a phony. And it's a stupid internet competition of who gets the most likes and shares and who gets the most attention on the internet. And most of the likes and shares are not real. They're fake. It doesn't translate to anything. And even if it did, those people watching you, are they going to go out and organize? Are they going to go out and change anything? No. And that, we really, like, most criticism of CPI is not worth our attention at all. It's really not. Right. And that there is a toxic culture of people that has developed, of people that claim to want to build an anti-imperialist movement, that trying to do something like this has never even occurred to them. The idea of building a mass anti-war march among the working class never occurred to them. The idea that they could do this, they could have a big gathering of people with "we won't fight another rich man's war," that never occurred to them. It doesn't even, like, the idea of even doing that it's not even something they would ever think of. All they're thinking about is, how can we get likes and shares on the internet? How can we prove that we're bigger than somebody else that we've never heard of? And that's what I'm desperately trying to break people out of. I'm trying to build a movement that we can recruit people who would never go looking for this kind of niche politics on the internet, and that we can build a community of people that can actually build real mobilizations to demand a government of action that'll fight for working families and oppose the imperialists. And if you want to help me do that, join CPI. And if you don't want to help me do that, I have no reason to listen to you. I have no reason to acknowledge you. I have no reason. I just don't care. I got shit to do. We got a real job to do. And, I'm on here, and sometimes I'll be honest with you all. There are times I think I shouldn't even be streaming. I think I'd like to keep these streams only for CPI members and all of that. I'm not doing that because so many great people have met us through these streams. A lot of the people we meet through the internet are not so good, but there's a layer of people who watch these streams and get involved in the community that are great. So I am going to keep them going. But there's times I feel like I shouldn't even be out there, because there are many people who claim to agree with this kind of politics that are absolutely unhelpful, that are full of negativism and criticism, and that for a lot of people, look, if all this is to you is internet entertainment, you'll eventually change the channel. And we all have all met these people. For a while, they're listening to communist stuff, and then they're listening to Muslim stuff, and then they're listening to Catholic traditional stuff, and then they're listening to libertarian stuff. And if it's just a TV show, you eventually change the channel. You don't watch the same TV show for 50 years, right? If this doesn't become a community of people that you're working in, if this doesn't become a group that you're involved with, where you have skin in the game and you're trying to accomplish goals, and you have friends in the group, and you're trying to help raise money and get the event to be successful and mobilize and get a message out there. If you don't become part of this, you'll eventually stop listening to this. And that's what I'm telling you. That's why with CPI, I tell people, look, I'm not trying to win the internet. I'm trying to recruit you to CPI. And if you don't eventually join CPI, eventually you're going to move on, right? Eventually you'll just start watching something else. And that kind of politics is not helpful, right? And that's the tragedy of the time that we're in, is that people just don't even know what a movement is. I'm lucky that I'm old enough. I'm only 38, but I'm old enough to have been involved in a movement. And I was part of the Occupy Wall Street movement. I was part of anti-war protests and stuff before that. And not hashtag revolution, but a real movement of activists. And I know what it means to be an activist. I have plenty of criticisms of the spaces I was in, but at least I know what it means to be part of a movement. And I want you to be part of a movement. And, and if you can join that movement, you'll stay with this. And if you don't join the movement, if you don't build real connections and be part of carrying out real operations, eventually you're going to move on to something else. And that you don't really come to understand any ideology, any religion, any ideology. You don't understand any of it unless you participate in it. These are ideologies are invented to serve a social purpose. right? They're psychological technology, right? There's social technology. That's what ideology is. And it gives you a framework through which you can live. And, I have seen many people that ideology is really what helps them get their shit together. And I've seen people that were involved in movements and then dropped out of the movements and then fell apart very quickly. And I've also seen people that kind of understand things, but were never activists. And they don't quite, because they're never activists, it never really means anything. And I just want to, tell this story tonight because I think this is very reflective of what I'm talking about. And, somebody who's one of the biggest tragedies on the internet, I think, and it's really sad, is Jason Unruhe, who I once considered to be a friend. Maoist rebel news from Canada. He's a guy who has good intentions. He's a guy who's isolated. He's a Canadian guy, a working class guy from Canada, former private security guard from Canada, who got into communist politics, but he was never an activist. It was always an internet thing with him. He's been in groups, but they were never real groups that did real activism. It was always an internet thing for Jason. And because it was always an internet thing, he never really understood what it meant to be in a movement. And he did good work when he was first coming around. He did videos defending North Korea and debunking the lies about North Korea that were very good. And that was impressive. And, on Libya, I think Gavin pointed this out. He was wrong about Libya. At first, he supported the so-called revolution, but then he changed his mind and he defended Gaddafi. And he took good positions, but he was isolated and he was just himself as a YouTuber back when nobody was talking about communism on the internet. He was all by himself doing it. And he endured a huge amount of cyberbullying and harassment, just a huge amount. And also, the people that all turned on him were communists. And I remember I had never talked to him. I'd never interacted with him. I was just a member of the Workers' World Party in New York City. And every time I would go out with young communists from around the country, there weren't many young members in New York, but there were young members. They would immediately, oh, have you seen Jason? He's such a nerd. And I would say to them, stop it. I said, he's doing it and you're not. I said, more people watch his YouTube videos than watch anything our organization has ever done. Maybe we should outdo him. Maybe we should be making videos, and at the time there was all this censorship. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't write an article. You couldn't give a speech without some party higher up telling you it was okay. I had to fight for every opportunity to write an article or put out a pamphlet. There was endless drama once because I put out a pamphlet during Occupy Wall Street and you never heard the end of it. It was like, we couldn't do any real creative work to advance revolutionary politics. Everything had to be done through the boomer leaders of the party that wanted to be the superstars of everything. And here was Jason every night making videos on YouTube, defending his understanding of what communist politics was and getting tens of thousands of views back then. He got quite a few views back then. And I said, look, he's doing it and you're not. And I defended him. And I stand by what I said. He was a much more effective voice spreading what he understood to be the correct political line than we were. And the way people were criticizing him, that's part of this like culture that is really, really toxic. And I want to actually describe the moment tonight that I thought was Jason's best moment. I was really proud and impressed by Jason in this moment. There's an awful person who is just the perfect incarnation, right? So after Jason had been going and then I started doing my streams, all of a sudden BreadTube was out there. BreadTube, was online attacking people. This awful, awful person called Surfs, and he's still around. He's just an awful, awful human being, right? This awful guy called Surfs emerged, and he's a Canadian guy, and all of his videos are just him showing other people's work and him insulting them. Like one of his classic things he does is he just shows other people's videos and then laughs, right? And he shows people saying perfectly logical things and he stops the video and goes, that's retarded. And it's just, he sits there showing other people's videos and laughing like a fool. And he goes after conservatives and he goes after anti-imperialists on the left. He's done a huge amount going after me. This guy Surfs is just an awful, awful human being, right? And he's just garbage, right? I mean, he really is. And he went after anyone who defended Syria. And like, this is him going after me at one point, and he's just sitting there and he's just showing video of me talking, and he's, and he just shows video of me, and I'll say something and he'll say, oh, and by that he meant that he's the next Martin Luther King. That's retarded. Oh, and he just lies about it. He's just an awful, awful, awful person. This Serfs guy, right? He's just a jerk. And what has he ever done to advance anti-imperialism? Absolutely nothing. He's just a fucking cyberbully. He's a Canadian rich kid who just sits around bullying people, right? And just, making streams, laughing at people, insulting people, calling people racist, misrepresenting other people's positions. He's just an awful, awful human being. He's just a vile person, right? And he's one of the people that started spreading around that I was secretly a Nazi and white supremacist. He went after everybody. I mean, he's gone after Max Blumenthal obsessively, and he's just a vile person. So he went after Jason, and it was classic. They had an exchange where Jason just epically destroyed him, and I actually want to just show. It was very short, and it was amazing. It was an amazing moment. And this was the moment where I was the most proud of Jason. I really, really was. This was a great moment for Jason. And I can just pull up the video here. I want to show you. So he wanted to debate Jason. And so this is what happened.
On the list, I've written down.
No, we agreed to debate whether or not China is socialist. And you last night sent me a message saying, oh, can we do this other stuff too?
So this is already strange. I put out.
Yeah. So the serfs decided to make fun of Jason, right? To go after Jason. Jason was the person he wanted to bully, with his worthless content where he shows pictures of people and goes, oh, that's retarded. Oh. And by that, he meant kill all the Jews. Oh, he's just an awful, awful human being. And shame on Ben Burgess. Ben Burgess is a vile human being who enables him. Ben Burgess sits there and helps all these people. He writes ContraPoint scripts. He advises Vosh. He advises serfs, right? And then he always says, well, I didn't say that. Yeah, he does, right? Ben Burgess is really the satanic figure behind all these people. They're all getting their instructions from Ben Burgess. They're all giving him thanks for advising them. He helps them character assassinate people. And Ben Burgess is smart enough to know better. He's a Trotskyite professor who's an evil person. And he knows that I'm not a Nazi, but he was helping and advising serfs the whole time, advising ContraPoints. Anyway, so he decides, serfs decides to go after Jason because Jason's a tanky and all this. He doesn't even do proper research. Jason doesn't support modern China. He doesn't. But serfs doesn't know that. And so he just decides, oh, he's called Maoist Rebel News. He must support modern China. And he sets up a stream to just insult him, to have a debate. And he doesn't even bother to do any research on what his position is.
The tweet. And I've got the tweet in front of me. So the tweet says, here's the debate topic. Possible, is China communist or socialist? And you responded, there's no way you're going to prove it's socialist. That's not, I agree to this debate.
Yeah, actually.
Or here's my position. This is just a random sentence coming out of my mouth.
No, so. It isn't. It is an acceptance. And then I repeatedly tweeted out in other times and on Facebook that was what was going to be the debate.
Well,
because that was the impression that I was left by the fact that you had given that, and then I accepted.
Well, first off, you have to say I accept these terms and I agree in the positive or the negative. Like, I don't even know where you stand on this, on that topic. If you want us to start there, we can.
Then
but
why don't you think you should have looked that up before suggesting that?
Shouldn't I have looked up your position on the topic before suggesting a debate on the topic?
Yeah.
Should.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a turd this TERFs guy is. He doesn't even bother to research the people. He uses his huge platform, inflated by bots and tweets and mainstream media, to go after people. He doesn't even know what Jason's position was on China. Challenges him to a debate, but it's not, as you'll see, it's not, he didn't really want to have a debate. He just wanted to be a cyberbully and harass Jason. And he's saying to him, you don't even know what my position is on China. You don't even know what my position is on China. You challenge me to a debate,
This is the exact same problem that you're now pointing at me. I mean, I don't want to sit in here and do a conversation of semantics. I mean,
So you
hence me also
scheduled a
trying to
debate,
clarify things with you.
and
That's
so
the whole
you
reason
also
on Twitter, I was
scheduled a
like,
debate
so-
without even knowing if there was even going to be a subject. Without
because
even
again, you responded with what's the date and time, and I was like,
yeah.
okay.
So I
guess he just
assumed
wants to
that
go
would
into
be
this
it.
head first.
So I assumed that would
Right,
be the subject.
So do you understand how unproductive what we're doing right now is?
Yeah, this is the way you set it up. So you set it up so that we could have a debate over something that we don't even disagree on, and then we could agree to it and then immediately move on to something else, like pushing petty drama on me, like the false transphobia accusation. That's exactly what you intended from the beginning. You already know that we both don't think China is socialist. You set this up this way. So my question is, are we going to debate whether or not China is socialist, or we have nothing to discuss?
And you just said ... we both agree on that.
Yes.
So is that
do you want to discuss it?
What kind of 4D chess do you think you're playing?
Do you
right now,
want to
dude?
debate it? Do you want to debate it, even if we do, someone playing devil's advocate, whatever, or there's no reason for me to be here? No, you're not going to start petty. You're not going to start petty drama and childishness to get views. You're going to engage in a principled debate, or I'm going to leave.
Principled debate of nonsense. You are an internet clown. You are exactly what I expected you to
See,
do. when you came on
exactly.
here.
You
That's
resorted
it,
right to insults right away.
we are.
You never had any
Okay.
intention of actually debating, and you immediately went to insults as soon as I called you out on it.
I would personally like to
There
address
is
the things
nothing
you accused me
more
of.
for
The things you
there's
accused me
nothing
of.
more
What
for
about
us
that?
to discuss.
Yeah. Epic, right? And it just exposed this Surfs guy for what he is. He's one of these internet people. And you will never please people like Surfs, right? Because all they exist to do is tear people down. They're not building a real anti-imperialist movement. They're not trying to organize people. They're just insult comedians, just showing video of other people and lying about them and insulting them and all of that. I mean, this is a totally worthless person. I mean, he's just a totally worthless human being. He's a liar. He's deceptive. He's, and it's like he just tears people down for a living, and Ben Burgess helps him do it, right? And like, they don't want to actually talk about anything of substance. All they want to do is engage in childish insults of people's appearances and all of this. And that here's the problem, though. The reason people like Surfs and other people like this, the other nattering negative people, the reason that they proliferate in our spaces is because we give them attention. And we have just got to start just boycotting these people as an entity. Seriously, I'm telling you, the people that engage in childish insult comedy, we've just got to stop engaging them, right? I mean, we've just got to make a rule that if people are going to act like fools, we hold ourselves to higher political standards, right? And that these people that have these big YouTube channels that lie about people, that insult people, that don't even, I mean, we just have to boycott them. And that's what I'm saying, right? And the person complaining about our use of the Green Book, right? It's again, if we had published a book on a different topic, would they have liked us? No. Right? If we had published a book on a different topic, would they be distributing it with us and helping us build a movement? No. So why do we care what they think, right? 99.9% of the people that criticize CPI are never going to help us no matter what we do, are never going to speak positively of us no matter what we do. So who cares about them? And you just kind of have to have that attitude is that look, I hate to say it, but if your anti-imperialist politics is not connected to building a real movement, if you're not connected to the anti-imperialist bloc of countries, the Union of Sahel States, Russia, China, Iran, and you're not connected to them, you're just on the internet talking about them. If you're not organizing demonstrations, if you're not organizing a real movement, you're not building a community, what you're doing is worthless. And if you are tearing us down as you don't build a real movement, why should we pay attention to you? Why should we? And the problem with the internet culture is it all becomes a big competition, right? I deserve the likes and shares, not you. I deserve the attention, not you. Well, there's nothing to say to such people. And we have to just kind of learn to not engage such people and just not give them our attention, because it's tragic. And there's a reason that these people are boosted. I revealed that and this is the thing, I wrote the book, BreadTube Serves Imperialism, and pointed out that they were possibly tied to American intelligence. And what I wrote was 1,000 times more true than even I knew. I knew about Steve Hassan, but I didn't know about Abigail Thorne being on the payroll of the British intelligence. I didn't know about ContraPoints being friends with Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton and boosted by Chelsea Clinton. I certainly didn't realize that there was a whole wing of the FBI called Combating Extremism that was advising all of them, as Caleb Kane later admitted. So I mean, it's like, when I said that the fake internet left, the cancel culture, toxic internet left, was possibly being funded by the American government because of the Steve Hassan connection, it was just the tip of the iceberg, right? And there's a lot of internet people distracting. And I really think it's sad the way Jason has become. And if Jason had joined a real movement, he wouldn't have deteriorated the way he did. And honestly, that was his best moment, when he just wouldn't let serfs insult him that way. That was great. The way he just hung up on serfs. That was exactly what serfs deserved. That is exactly what serfs deserved. And that guy, he's still out there, right? And that guy is a vile, worthless human being who has no, what? And the fact that anyone would think that guy is some great socialist or something. Really, that's what you do, is you have a channel where you put other people's up there and go, oh, this person's dumb. Even if the person was dumb, how is that productive? Right? What is he teaching his audience other than to be a jerk and make fun of people? And shame on Ben Burgess, the Trotskyite, for advising that kind of thing. Don't think for a minute Ben Burgess's fingerprints aren't all over all of this. Ben Burgess, Trotskyite, Shachtmanite, crypto-Zionist, he's got his fingers in all of those circles. And he's a vile human being for what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. And he knows on his streams. People have come on and said, Caleb's not a Nazi. Oh, I know he's not a Nazi. Really? Then why are you advising all the people? Why did you advise all the people who said that? Right? Because you don't care, because you're a jerk. That's why. Because, Ben Burgess is not a good person. Right? And serfs is not a good person. Right? And that it's one thing to not understand anti-imperialism and have a different political line. But these people that are just internet nattering nabobs, right? That are just, this person's stupid, this person looks funny. What are they contributing to anything? They're just putting negativity out there. Insulting people. We can do better than that. And we as a community, we've got to learn to just not engage these people. Seriously, just not engage them. We had a great fundraising stream on Saturday. I was blown away. Our community came together. Person after person came on the stream and talked about what CPI meant to them. It was great. It was really, really great. And, just had a great meeting of the CPI captains to talk about how we're moving ahead towards our national training 7-day program. That's going to be really, really awesome. A lot of great things are happening. The Center for Political Innovation is an amazing organization. And the reason it's amazing is because we actually take this seriously. And we had an amazing convention last year in Chicago, and we're going to have an amazing convention this year. So now I'll do the roll call, and then we'll start answering people's questions. So names and locations, folks, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us? Anybody? Names and locations. I'll call you all out as I see you. Who is with us? Names and locations. Brian in Dayton. Good to see you, Brian in Dayton. Ryan in Kansas City. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Who is with us? Michael in Bayonne. Auckland, New Zealand. Good to see you. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Liverpool. Very cool. Liverpool. All right. Ian in the Yukon. Good to see you, Ian. Names and locations. Bradley in Los Angeles. Good to see you. Toronto. Patricia Williams in Canada. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Anybody else? Nora in Berlin. Oh, over in Germany. Wow. Welcome, Nora. Anthony in Detroit. Good to see you, Anthony. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Cameron in New Hampshire. Good to see you. Good to see you. So listen, this book is out, but this book, I know it was a little too pricey for some people, right? It's a big book, and John in Chicago is here, JJ Galanius in Salt Lake City, Paul in Brentwood, Dan in Los Angeles, Brooklyn in the house, Phil. Very, very good. We do have this much smaller book now. This is the book of quotations. We were giving it away on the fundraising stream to people who donated, and this is the book of quotations. It's just a book of quotations about innovationism. Got a nice cover with the Kim Il-sung flower. And also tomorrow night, once again, we're having the Juche study group led by Noah, right? Noah's been doing them. It'll be the 9th session, I think now. I think the 10th session maybe. Every week we've been doing the Juche study group, studying North Korea's ideology every night. Every Tuesday night, and we're going to do it again tomorrow night. And it's a consistency thing, and we do the Juche study sessions. And we got Rod in Australia, so that'll be on this channel and on the CPI YouTube channel tomorrow night. So I hope that people will come to that. It's great. Noah is great, and the discussions we've had there are great. I'm looking forward to meeting Wes. It looks like I'll get to meet Wes later this week. Wes was somebody who we actually first had our interactions. I guess he'd been following our community for a while. But we're having a little demonstration in New York City later this week, kind of a small CPI rally that we're doing. Obviously, I'm not going to give the time and location away on here because, I don't want the enemy to know where we're going to be. But we're having a little rally, and it looks like Wes is going to be there. So I'm really looking forward to meeting Wes and meeting the whole crew. And, we're going to have dinner afterwards. It'll be just a great little meetup for our organization. Great things are happening, and our community is moving forward. So yeah, I just want to thank you all for your continued ongoing support. So I guess we'll get to the questions that have come in. John said, can we have a moment of silence and prayer in honor of Mother Khadija Farrakhan? Right. So Minister Louis Farrakhan is somebody I have I look up to quite a bit, a great anti-imperialist. And Minister Louis Farrakhan's wife died, and she was very much part of him, right? That she supported him, and she was very much part of what made Minister Louis Farrakhan who he is. And that Minister Louis Farrakhan's pretty up in age, but did the Million Man March, etc. And she was with him the whole way. I was listening to a speech. It was every year he gives a big presentation on Savior's Day, which is the kind of the holiday of the Nation of Islam. One year it was he talked about Black women and etc. And he said when he was first married to Khadija Farrakhan in the early 60s, they've been married quite a long time. They were having an argument, and he slapped her, and she slapped him back. And he said it wasn't it was I slapped her and she slapped me right back. And the audience applauded, right? And he said that he admired that about his wife, that I guess this was in a different time where things like domestic violence were more tolerated, but his wife wasn't going to tolerate being hit by a man, and so she hit him right back. And he talked about that. And that was I don't know, I Mother Khadija Farrakhan is somebody who's very, very inspiring. And actually, I'm Facebook friends with a couple of Farrakhan's children, and they've republished my tweets on their in Final Call before because I've defended them when they're canceling them, accusing them of anti-Semitism. They've actually republished my tweets in Final Call a few times, and I've been mentioned. I was at a conference in Iran with the Nation of Islam a few years ago. So yes, to answer John's question, we will have a moment of silence in honor of Mother Khadija Farrakhan. All right. Thank you, John, for bringing that to our attention. Now, the next question, it's a 3-part question. And I am careful about reading this. This person alleges that Burkina Faso is showing interest in strengthening ties to Israel. Is that true? Based on what? I'm not sure I buy that. I have a hard time thinking that that's true. If you can point me toward evidence of that, I just haven't seen that anywhere. But I find that to be a very hard, claim. So I just and why is it he can say before the war, new defense corporations with Iran, what have these countries to gain with cooperation with Israel? Yeah, I really don't. I'm not sure that I really would have a hard time believing that, right? He's a Muslim. They're aligned with Russia. I'm not thinking that they want to have diplomatic ties with Israel. They did officially cut diplomatic ties with France recently. So I don't know. And then the second thing, the second question is a little bit more nuanced that he sent. He said, did you read any articles in the Iranian press that said the Syrian Ba'ath Party embraced neoliberalism under Bashar and Bashar's privatizations, advanced neoliberalism that drove unrest? I didn't read any articles in the Iranian press that said that, but that is actually true. And it's complicated. Again, it's nuanced. Syria's economy in the 70s and 80s, even in the 90s, was kind of like the Soviet style, right? Everything was nationalized, and they needed foreign investment, and they needed reform, and they had market reforms. They needed foreign investment. And, there was a Syrian guy who protested when the Syrian war was just beginning. I was involved in some protests with like the Syrian American Forum. And he talked about how, like, when he was a kid in Syria in the 70s and 80s, it was illegal to have any U.S. currency. Right? If you had $1, any U.S. currency, you could go to jail because America was their enemy, American imperialism. Well, under Bashar Assad, that was not the case. And there was a lot of US dollars in the country, and they wanted American companies to invest. And that's kind of like China. It's necessary. Some of the neoliberal reforms were necessary. However, some of them were not. And that there was an increasing gap between the rich and poor. And that when the Arab Spring happened, you had a lot of the rural folks. There was a drought, and a lot of the rural folks from the countryside that are more conservative and religious piled into the cities. And that was a big aspect of the Arab Spring all throughout the Middle East. But in Syria, that was a factor. And in Syria, it tends to be the urban folks that tend to be more, the religious minorities tend to live in the cities, the Christians, the Alawites, etc. And in the cities, you tend to have more educated people that are more secular. And it's in the rural areas that you have people that are more conservative. And like the Muslim Brotherhood, which was a big part of the Arab Spring, was more rural folks. And that's how it was in Egypt, too. The Muslim Brotherhood was a big part of the Egyptian revolution. Egypt was not an anti-imperialist state, but that's all over the Middle East. And that part of it was that the people in the rural areas, they didn't have as much of a social safety net as they had before. And there were privatizations. And so, they were struggling. And that's an issue in Iran, too. And Iran has had issues with the fact that, Iran's, economy is not as socialistic as it was in the 80s, per se. And that the gap between the rich and poor has certainly increased, and that a lot of these countries wanted to get foreign investment and introduced kind of market reforms. And then the contradictions that those market reforms brought into the country, the imperialists have seized on. And that's true, not just true for Syria, that's true for Iran, that was true for Libya under Gaddafi, right? Gaddafi, I mean, part of the issue in Libya was that, that there were market reforms. I mean, that is something that's true in every anti-imperialist country to some degree or other. When you bring in foreign investment, the social safety net decreases a little bit. There's not as much of a guarantee of employment if people are working in private enterprises rather than state-run enterprises. Number one. And number two, there's more of a gap between the rich and poor because some people are going to get businesses going that get foreign investment, et cetera, and some people are not, right? And the imperialists will use anything to try and divide a socialist country, right? If those countries didn't have market reforms, they would use that to economically isolate them and make them starve, et cetera. So, if it's one thing or it's another. But yes, all of the anti-imperialist countries, including the anti-imperialist countries in the Middle East in the 90s, they moved away from having Soviet-style economies that introduced new kinds of things. Iran never had a Soviet-style economy. Iran has a state-run economy, but they always had a big private sector. But in the 90s and even more recently, there has been kind of a shift. They allowed private banking in Iran, for example, but the private banks have to be like subsidized and guided by the state bank. And there are things, one of the anti-government revolts in Iran started out not as an anti-government revolt, as a revolt by hardliners against a local corrupt bank. And then the anti-government people seized on it and just turned it into an anti-government thing. And that's, if you listen to the hardliners in Iran, a lot of what they point out is that by moving to embrace like market reforms and free market stuff, they're weakening the solidarity of the Iranian people and enabling the base of support for the Islamic Revolution to go away. And that's true, right? And I think part of Iran coming out of this war, I mean, I don't think the Islamic Republic will be overthrown, but part of coming out of this war will be that the hardliners are very strengthened. And then in addition, there's going to be more state control over the economy in Iran, right? That Rouhani very much wanted Iran's economy to have American influence on it and all of that. And Iran's going to pivot closer to the BRICS countries, and there's going to be more of a state-run economy. And I mean, 21st century socialism is not the Soviet thing. When you say neoliberalism, I think you're talking about, these countries are not neoliberal by any means, right? I mean, Syria before the fall of Assad, everything. I mean, they had state-run industries everywhere and all of that, but it wasn't completely state-run, right? And that, like Iran, right? Again, 90, huge amount of the industries, huge amount of banking, everything is government-run. But when you say these countries had neoliberal reforms, you mean that they became less, there was an adjustment, kind of like China with its reform and opening up. But honestly, in these countries, it wasn't even that drastic. Things were still largely state-run. So yeah, I just, I wouldn't say neoliberal reforms is not the language I would use. But let's pull up Felix. Didn't get his question answered. And so Felix wanted me to make sure I answered his question from before. So Felix, I'm sorry I didn't answer this question before. From how I understand CPI, it's primarily focused on the USA, but has international members. How do you see the work of CPI in an international context? Are there organizations outside the USA CPI has occasionally, or on a more prominent basis, collaborated with? Well, yeah, for example, in Australia, David Fox is part of the Great Southern Discussion Club. They do great work. Jyoti Brar from the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. At one point, she was flying over to the USA and speaking at our conferences. We've had different relationships. I will say, things have changed. There's been some adjustments. We don't call ourselves a communist group anymore. We're innovationists, and we're done begging for a place in communism. And, that's one thing that, people who attack CPI, I will tell you, that is one thing we are not ever going to do, and it's well, anyway, I could rant about that. I'm a little too tired and I don't want to get too fired up, but we're doing our own thing. We're innovationists. We are building an optimistic movement that celebrates human creativity and calls for an economy that invests in people. And if we continue to call ourselves communists, that kind of puts us in a cesspool of competing with other people who call themselves communists. And we're just, we're not interested in owning the brand of communism. We want to build our own movement as anti-imperialists. And if we continue to call ourselves communists, when people meet us, they think we're like the other people that call themselves communists. And we just have to do our own thing, right? And we're optimistic. We're not negative. We're not trying to incite people's negativity. So we're just doing our own thing. And, we have some strange relationships, maybe that don't make sense. The Uhuru movement, do they call themselves communists? I guess they're African internationalists, African socialists, but we're very close with them. Right. There's other groups that we're close with, and our relationships are not based on people agreeing with us. It's about, there's some agreement, obviously, but it's about being able to get stuff done. We've got shit to do, folks. We have got shit to do. And we urgently need to carry out operations and build a real anti-imperialist movement. We're different. Exactly. We have got shit to do that we urgently need to get done. And in order to get that shit done, we got to have people work with us. We need people to join CPI first and foremost. But in addition to that, we need other people that we can collaborate with and work with. And if people will work with us, great. We want to work with them. And if people don't want to work with us, good riddance. I do not understand. There's a number of people who expect us to run to some other group and go, please, please, please let us work with you. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. If somebody wants to work with us, they will. And if they're serious about building an anti-imperialist movement, they will. Look, Angela McCurdle, libertarian, definitely doesn't agree with me on a lot of things. Look at her Twitter feed. But, not only did she allow us, they put our logo on the Rage Against the War Machine rally. They let us be sponsors. Not only that, she called me and invited me to the event with Joe Kent. They wanted me there because she's trying to do a real thing. And she had a real event with Joe Kent, and the Schiller Institute was there and other people. And she specifically called me. She wanted CPI there. And I arranged to go there with my cameraman, and we did a great thing. She wanted us there, right? People that are really doing shit want people at their shit. That's generally how it works, you know? Right? If you're building a real movement, you want as many people there. But if you're not building a real movement, if you're building an internet fandom, it's like, oh, you're not good enough to be with me. Ooh, you know, well, okay, fuck you. You know what I mean? I mean, you know, I mean, we don't have time. We ain't got time for that. We really ain't got time to chase after people who don't like us, people who disrespected us, and beg for their attention. We have no need for that. You know, and I mean, I got to tell you, I mean, certain people, I'll just put it this way. Certain people, they could have been our friends. They could have worked with us, and they decided instead, no, they wanted to be competition. They wanted to be competition because they're social media people. They're not real organizers. They wanted to be competition. Well, that was their decision, and they wanted a competition, and we have won that competition, right? I mean, just take my media tour that we just did, right? This book came out, Imperialism and Anti-Imperialism. I went on Kim Iverson's show. I went on Academic Agent's show. I went on, I just went on Trad Catholic Night this morning. I went on Garland Nixon. I went on Jamarl Thomas. You go down the line. I went on Sabi Sabs. I went on every show. I've spoken with Putin. We had two of our members, not just one of us, two CPI members directly interacted with the Russian president. We have gone to multiple international gatherings. I mean, you know, and what have these people done? Talk shit on the internet, go to other people's events and take selfies of themselves. You know, fuck them. Who cares? Who cares what they do? Right? Yeah, we're the real communists. And now, right, they expected us, as soon as they declared themselves to be the real communists, they expected us to run to them and go, please, please let us be part of your group. And I said, no, we're not doing that. And I didn't even want to do this, but I was kind of convinced to call them and say, hey, do you want to work with us? And they blew us off in a very rude way. Well, fuck them. That's on them. Bye. See ya. I mean, that's that, right? And some of our members didn't understand that they're an internet fandom and we're a real group. And it was some of our most worthless members, I must say. I mean, people who didn't show up to things, people who really, I mean, I don't even want to get going there, but some of our members who just couldn't understand, you know, that these people they like to watch on the internet, you know, there had to be a way that they weren't evil. Well, what they've done to us is pretty evil. So what they've said about us, what they've done to us, these people are probably working with the FBI, and they just couldn't understand that. See ya. You know what I mean? And, I mean, we're doing stuff, right? And if you want to work with us and do real stuff, do it. And if you don't, you don't. I mean, and that's the thing. We got real shit to do. So we're doing real stuff. But anyway, yeah, I mean, we're getting real stuff done. And I must say I'm very proud of CPI. I really am. I mean, the way our community comes together and gets stuff done is really amazing. And the way we work together, the way we understand each other, the way we're more effectively pulling off operations every day, it's really, really impressive to me. When you work with people, right, you learn to work with people and you learn to get stuff done. And that's the thing, right? When you learn to get stuff done, right, it becomes easier to get stuff done the next time. And then it becomes easier to get stuff done the next time, right? And the more you work together with people, the more you learn what their strengths are, the way you learn how to get over different things. It's like we have stuff to do. We have an actual function to carry out. Stuff like blocking the No Kings parade, stuff like, like having our convention, stuff like the Juche study group, stuff like, I mean, you look at CPI, if you look at the list of what we've done so far this year, we're not even halfway through this year and we've done so much because we're a real organization. And one thing that we're not doing is begging for a place in communism. Yeah, action speaks louder than words. We've got shit to do. And if people want to do stuff with us, we're happy to work with them. And if they don't, they don't. And that's fine. And if we had to beg permission from some central committee to do what we were doing, we wouldn't have been able to do any of this stuff. right? And that's the sad thing. You know, a lot of these groups that exist don't really do much, because in order to be in the group, you have to beg permission from a bunch of people to do stuff. Well, CPI is not like that, right? We help people find their strengths, right? Penny wrote a book about the Union of Sahel States. The LA group is out there every weekend doing outreach, right? We're constantly doing stuff. We want people to be active. We want people to do stuff. We don't have a committee that, oh, if you want to do something, you better call up the committee. Now, obviously, we want people to do it in the best way. We don't want people to misrepresent the group and what we stand for. There are some limits, like in anything, but CPI exists to carry out operations, to advance anti-imperialism, to educate people. That's why we exist. And I don't know why some of these other groups exist. I wouldn't even really call them groups. I don't know why these social media brands exist. Because they just, they don't really do very much to advance anti-imperialism. And then, so why should we give them the time of day? Why should we concern ourselves with them? Right? If they're not going to help us, right? They've made it clear they don't want to help us. They've made it clear they don't. What is our concern? It's late, folks. I got to tell you, I have had a long day today. I woke up, I did Trad Catholic Night, I did WBAI, I did RT, I made the slideshow, I came home, I had a CPI leadership meeting, and then tonight we did the stream. I've had a full day, right? It's almost 1 a.m. local time. It's 10 minutes till 1 a.m. local time. But that's how these things work. And I love what I do. I really do love what I do. And I really love our community. I really, really do. We have something very, very special. And we're heading into our 7-day national training program. If you haven't signed up, please do it. Please go ahead and sign up because it's going to be a great opportunity. We've got great stuff going on and we're doing great things. And I really appreciate everyone who's watching this, everyone who's in the chats night after night. Hope people enjoyed the history slideshow for tonight. That's really all I got to say. So thanks, everybody. Thank you. And I guess I'm going to put on the closing music. I'll be back tomorrow. Dare to struggle, dare to win. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.